The unspoken words. The mahogany door was ajar. The 28th floor hallway, usually silent at this hour, seemed to hold its breath with her. Audrey's hands trembled as she clutched the insulated bag. She had chosen Julian's favorite meal, steak tartare from the tiny French bistro he frequented in his youth. 5 years of marriage. Nothing grand, just an intimate celebration for two life partners, or at least that's what she believed. The muffled sound of a woman's laughter made her stop. She knew that laugh, high-pitched, a little vain, a little practiced. Chloe Vance, the communications intern, with eyes that always lingered too long on Julian's suits. A chill ran down her spine. Still, she took 2 more steps and with her fingertips, pushed the door open another inch. The crack revealed more than any shout ever could. Chloe stood in front of him. Julian's hands, which had so often held Audrey's in moments of fear, were now on the other woman's waist. His smile was the same, gentle, charming, yet in this context, it looked like a cruel mask. The sound of a muffled kiss resonated like a slap across her heart. Audrey didn't cry. She stood there for an eternal instant, feeling the floor give way beneath her feet. Her vision blurred, not from tears, but from disbelief, as if it were a scene she wasn't a part of, a cheap soap opera mistakenly using the faces of those she loved. With a deliberate movement, she closed the door with a firm click. The silence that followed was almost religious. Julian saw her. His body froze. Chloe pulled away, confused, adjusting her blouse. Audrey didn't scream. She simply walked to the glass table, placed the insulated bag on the floor, and with a voice low but sharp as a knife, she said, "I saw you." The phrase hung in the air like an unsung lament. There was no scandal, no crying. There was a tone of finality, of an absolute goodbye. Julian got up, his mouth agape, searching for words he didn't even know where to begin. But Audrey had already turned her back. The sound of the door closing behind her was louder than any argument could ever be. In the hallway, the world seemed strange, out of place. She walked mechanically to the elevator. Her fingers trembled as she pressed the button, but her face remained serene, not from peace, but from paralysis. Alone in the elevator, Audrey finally allowed a single tear to slide down her cheek. Just one, enough to confirm that it had been real, that there was a life before this moment, and now, another after. On the street, the city was still alive. Car horns, laughter, lights. But for her, everything seemed distant. The night had swallowed everything. Julian remained motionless, as if time had collapsed. The boardroom, once so familiar, now felt like a stage for a Greek tragedy, where the mirrored walls reflected not the power of a magnate, but the devastated image of a defeated man. Chloe, ashamed and uneasy, gathered her things in a hurry and left without a word. The door closed behind her with a timid, insignificant click compared to the emotional thunder that had just occurred. The anniversary dinner lay on the floor. The scent of her homemade French food filled the room with cruel irony. Julian approached slowly, as if treading on rubble. He opened the bag. The steak tartare was perfectly packed, accompanied by a carefully folded napkin. Inside, a small card with Audrey's handwriting read, "To another 5 years, and all the ones to follow." The words hit him harder than any accusation. He sat at the table, looking at the food as if it were an offering from another time, another life. He tried to imagine what she had felt, seeing him with another woman. Not just the physical betrayal, but the destruction of an entire history they had so carefully built. For an instant, he buried his head in his hands. The regret was as physical as it was psychological. A lump in his throat, a knot in his stomach, his breathing ragged. Julian had always believed he could control everything. Business, image, even feelings. He never truly believed Audrey would leave. She had always loved him too much, or so he thought. That night, he didn't go home. He stayed right there. The office, sitting in the darkness. His phone buzzed. Then it vibrated non-stop. Messages from Chloe, from his assistant, from friends inviting him to a party. But there was no sound more deafening than the silence Audrey had left behind. At dawn, Julian went home. Every corner of the apartment seemed inhabited by her. The books on the shelf, the shoes lined up in the closet, the soft scent of her perfume on the pillow. But the most devastating thing was the emptiness. Her suitcases were gone. Not a single item of clothing, no farewell note. Just absence. And the silence. He called dozens of times, sent messages, emails, even digital letters. He tried to find her in all their usual spots, their favorite cafe, the bookstore where she spent hours. Nothing. It was as if Audrey had evaporated from the world, leaving behind only the traces of pain. The realization came in stages, like a slow demolition. First, the loss. Then, the guilt. And finally, the recognition of something he had avoided for years. He was the problem. Not just for the betrayal, but for all the previous moments when he had stayed silent, distanced himself, and built walls around himself, leaving Audrey to knock from the outside until she grew tired. And then, the question he couldn't ignore, the one that burned in his mind like a live coal. How did he let things get to a point of no return? The man behind the mask, before he was Julian Foster, the magnate on magazine covers and in business headlines, he was just Julian, a quiet kid from a small town in the Midwest, the middle child of a couple obsessed with perfection. His father, a rigid and methodical engineer, expected excellence in everything. His mother, an elegant socialite, lived for appearances. From a young age, Julian understood that love in his home came with conditions, impeccable grades, unwavering posture, contained emotions. In adolescence, he discovered that vulnerability was a luxury he couldn't afford. The few times he tried to express sadness or fear were met with phrases like, "Men don't cry," or "You have to be strong." So he learned to silence what he felt and to wear the armor of perfection. He was the model student, the responsible brother, the young prodigy who, at 17, already knew he would study business and build something great. During college at Northwestern University, Julian was both admired and fired. Intelligent, articulate, always one step ahead. His charisma was studied, almost calculated. He knew exactly what to say, how to behave, what to wear. The insecure boy from the Midwest was hidden behind well-cut suits and practiced smiles. At 28, he founded his first boutique hotel chain in the Caribbean. In 3 years, he owned a network that stretched across the region. An empire built with surgical precision. The press called him the architect of tropical luxury. He said he had no time for distractions, read, feelings. The truth was, the more he grew professionally, the more he distanced himself from any real connection. He learned to measure people's value by their efficiency. He only trusted those who delivered results. In the few relationships he had, everything was superficial. Glamorous parties, expensive gifts, empty promises. No woman managed to break through the wall he had built himself. Until Audrey. When he met her, she was the opposite of everything he knew. Spontaneous, sensitive, emotionally open. At first, it irritated him. But there was something magnetic about the way she saw the world, as if everything could still be beautiful, even after it was broken. She wanted nothing from him but time and truth, and that, paradoxically, was what terrified him most. By marrying Audrey, Julian believed he could be the man she saw in him. But he didn't know how. He was so used to living for the outside, to maintaining an impeccable facade, that he hadn't learned to be truly present, always busy, always traveling, always worried about the next expansion. In the rare moments at home, he offered gifts instead of presents, and she patiently waited. What few knew or preferred not to see was that Julian lived in fear. Fear of being discovered as insufficient. Imposter syndrome gnawed at him, not because of his business, but because of his feelings. He didn't believe himself worthy of true love, and because of that, when Chloe appeared with her blind adoration and obvious desire, he gave in, not out of passion, but out of weakness. Because with her, he didn't need to be real, just admired. Behind every impeccable decision and every achievement plastered on the pages of Forbes, there was a man exhausted from pretending, alone in his luxury penthouse, amidst imported wines and modern art. Julian Foster was just a boy from the Midwest, still waiting for a hug that never came. And now, with Audrey gone, he would have to face for the first time what he had avoided for so long. Who was he, really, without the masks, the silent gaps? For a long time, Julian and Audrey's life ran like a Swiss watch, precise, elegant, but impersonal. They would wake up together, share the same breakfast, exchange quick kisses before leaving for their commitments. To any observer, they were a perfect couple. But behind the choreographed routine was a growing silence, like an echo that refused to die. There were things Audrey wanted to say but didn't. How much she missed talking without looking at the clock, dancing barefoot in the kitchen without being called distracted, feeling she was still seen as a woman, not a static piece of a social portrait. But every time she tried to open up, Julian would deflect. He would say he was tired, that it wasn't the right time, that she was being too dramatic. Julian, for his part, also had words stuck in his throat. He was afraid to admit that he didn't know how to be vulnerable, that he didn't trust anyone enough to be emotionally naked. He avoided saying that success left him exhausted, that sometimes he felt everything he had built was an elegant lie. Instead of confessing, he stayed silent. Silence was his way of protecting himself and, without realizing it, of hurting her. The chasm between them didn't arise with the betrayal. It was dug little by little, by nights they slept side by side without touching, by dinners where their eyes didn't meet, by smiles that served protocol more than affection. Love didn't end. It simply drowned in the absence of dialogue, in the sterile repetition of days that always seemed the same. Audrey sometimes wrote short notes left on his pillow or on the breakfast table. "I miss you. I dreamed of you last night. I want to talk." Julian read them, but rarely responded. He believed that gestures didn't require words, that his physical presence was enough. He didn't understand that love doesn't live only on physical presence, but on listening, on exchange, on active care. They had plans, but they never revisited them together. They talked about having children someday, about trips when there was time, about projects later, always later. And in that later, intimacy slowly died. They became calendar partners, commitment accomplices, but strangers in their own home. On certain nights, Audrey would find herself imagining what would have happened if she had insisted more, if she had screamed, cried, demanded. But that wasn't her way. She loved with silence and presence and hoped it would be enough. When she realized it wasn't, it was already too late. The silence had become an impassable wall. Julian, meanwhile, believed that stability was enough. He grew up believing that love was demonstrated with responsibility, with paid bills, with silent loyalty. He never learned that loving also means being emotionally vulnerable, risking being fragile in front of the other person. And for fear of appearing weak, he chose silence, as if it could protect him from everything. But what he didn't say, "I'm sorry, I'm lost, I need you," was exactly what destroyed everything. And now, each in their own corner, they had to face the cruelest of lessons. Sometimes silence weighs more than any mistake. The Unsent Letters, please share this story, leave your thoughts, and subscribe for more content. Chloe Vance appeared like so many other young, promising faces who passed through Julian's company. Full of energy, with ambition in her eyes, and a smile that seemed to know more than it said. She was 24 and had a notable talent for digital marketing, but what really set her apart was her audacity. Unlike the other interns, she wasn't intimidated by Julian's imposing figure. On the contrary, she provoked him with sharp questions, veiled compliments, and an almost theatrical confidence. At first, Julian saw her only as another efficient collaborator. He noticed her sparkle, her striking presence, but dismissed any deeper interpretation. For him, Chloe's insinuations were harmless, part of a power game in which he was always in control. When she started calling him her favorite boss, or commenting on how good navy blue looked on him, he would just smile, but he never reprimanded her. He believed it meant nothing, and deep down, maybe he wanted to believe it. Audrey noticed Chloe at the first corporate event they were all at together. The way she approached Julian, how she lightly touched his arm when she laughed, how her eyes lingered a little too long on his lips. It was subtle, but clear, and once again, Audrey chose to trust. She preferred to believe that Julian would never cross that line, that the bond between them was stronger than any youthful flirting. Still, small cracks began to appear, messages answered too late, meetings that ran longer than expected, Julian's gaze more absent than usual. Audrey would ask cautiously, "Everything okay?" And he, always cordial, would say it was just fatigue, that work was heavy, that nothing had changed. And in a way it was true, except for what he refused to admit, even to himself. Chloe, on the other hand, was persistent. She knew Julian wore armor and was determined to find the weak points. Little by little, she got closer, asking for personal advice, praising his leadership in an almost intimate way, creating situations where they needed to work late, alone. She played intelligently, testing the limits, just waiting for the moment he would let his guard down. And he did. Not all at once. It was gradual, almost imperceptible. One too many shared laughs, a compliment accepted without resistance, a touch not rejected. He told himself it wasn't betrayal, that everything was under control. But the truth was, there was a part of him that felt seen by Chloe in a way he hadn't felt with Audrey in a long time, not because of her fault, but because of his own inability to show himself. Audrey, as intuitive as ever, felt the changes in the air. She had no proof, no smoking gun. She only had the intuition of a woman who loved someone deeply. But instead of confronting him, she faltered. And for love, for fear of losing, for blind hope, she ignored the signs. She continued making homemade dinners, writing sweet notes, trying to rekindle a flame she wasn't even sure still existed. The betrayal didn't begin the moment Julian kissed Chloe. It began much earlier, in the glances he didn't divert, in the words he didn't say, in the cowardly silences. And Audrey, still unknowingly, had already begun to say goodbye. Not to the marriage, but to the idea that love alone would be enough to sustain them both. Deep down, Everyone knew. Julian knew it. Audrey felt it. Chloe played the game. And no one, absolutely no one, wanted to face the truth before it was too late. The weight of absence. Audrey's departure wasn't loud. She left no letters or notes. There were no bags thrown or dramatic farewells. She simply vanished. When Julian got home the next night, he found the apartment in a strange order. Nothing was scattered, nothing was broken, but with an absence that hurt like an open wound exposed to the wind. Her closet was empty. The photos of the couple, always scattered delicately around the living room, were gone. The plants she lovingly cared for now stood silent as witnesses to the abandonment. Julian panicked. He searched his contacts, called her closest friends, visited the cafes and bookstores she frequented. But it was as if Audrey had evaporated from the world. Even her social media accounts were deactivated. He went to her parents' apartment, only to be met with a closed door and a terse message from her mother. She asked that you not look for her. What destroyed him most wasn't anger. It was the silence. Audrey, who had always believed in words, who wrote letters and notes, even when there were no fights, now communicated only with absence. This made Julian feel not just like a traitor, but also invisible, as if there was no longer a place for him in her life. In the following days, he tried everything. He sent flowers to her old colleagues, hired a private detective, accessed old emails looking for clues. Nothing. Every attempt was a cruel reminder that she didn't want to be found. He revisited all the messages he had ignored, all the glances he had diverted, all the "we'll talk laters" that never happened. Now, everything screamed in his memory as warnings he had never wanted to hear. The nights became a torment. Julian spent hours staring at the ceiling, mentally rewriting the conversations that never happened. He started drinking frequently, something he had once considered a waste of time. He stopped going to the company. His face, always present at meetings and events, was now replaced by formal press releases. Partners worried, but he barely heard them. By the third week, in a desperate gesture, he went to the beach where they had spent their honeymoon. He stayed for 3 days in the same hotel, waiting, not knowing exactly for what. Maybe a message, a sign, a miracle. He would sit in the same restaurant where she used to order grilled fish and lemonade, looking out at the sea with an emptiness in his chest that even the warm wind couldn't fill. There, for the first time, he cried for real. Not tears of anger, not tears of wounded pride, but a silent, pained, deep weeping. The crying of a man who finally understood that he had lost something that couldn't be bought, replaced, or easily won back. The crying of someone who realizes that love requires presence, not just promises. He returned to Chicago like a ghost. The apartment seemed bigger, colder, more silent. He started seeing Audrey everywhere, in the shadows of the hallway, in the clothes forgotten in a drawer, in the scent that still lingered on his pillow. The world kept spinning, but Julian had stopped. And then came the final silence, the confirmation that Audrey had stopped trying to reach him, and now it was he who was shouting for her into the void. But she was no longer listening. The new beginning. It was on a morning of persistent nausea that Audrey decided to take the test. She was staying in a small hotel in Albany, away from her family, her friends, and any trace that could lead Julian to her. For days, her body had felt strange. The fatigue, the morning sickness, a sudden sensitivity to fragrances, a new aversion to the coffee she had always loved. Still, the confirmation came like a sudden punch to the stomach. Pregnant, and not with one, but with two. Twins, sitting on the cold bathroom floor, holding the positive test in her trembling hands. Audrey felt the world spin. She didn't cry. Not yet. There was just a crushing silence inside her. Part of her wanted to run, to hide, to pretend it wasn't true. Another part, more raw and wounded, whispered that this was the perfect opportunity for revenge. To tell Julian, to make him suffer, to force him to face the consequences of what he destroyed. But the clearest voice of all was the one that cried out for protection, not for herself, for her children, for those two Liaozes growing inside her. Getting revenge through the pregnancy would put her in a game that had already destroyed too much. She didn't want her children used as instruments of pain. She wanted them to come into the world without the weight of the past, free from the shadow of betrayal. During sleepless nights, Audrey talked in silence to the babies who didn't yet have names. She touched her belly and promised to do the impossible to make them feel loved. She decided, with the firmness of someone who has lost everything and still chooses to love, that she would raise these children alone. It would be difficult. It would be painful. But it would be dignified. And above all, it would be true. She returned to a charming coastal town in Maine, where she had spent a summer years before, still single, when she was writing her second award-winning story. It was a quiet, artistic, colorful place where time seemed to move differently. She rented a simple cottage with large windows and white walls. Far from luxury, she found space to breathe. The first weeks were about adaptation. She learned to cook for herself, to walk slowly, to deal with the nausea. She bought books on motherhood and wrote a lot, not for publication, but to understand herself. She started a diary where she recorded everything, her fears, her dreams, her promises. Each word was a way of sewing the broken pieces back together. The ultrasound that confirmed the baby's gender, 2 boys, was one of the most quietly intense moments of her life. There was no applause, no hands to hold, no Julian to hold her shoulders. But there was a different kind of peace, a certainty that even alone, she was enough, that these children would be loved with every fiber of her soul. In time, her belly grew, and with it, a new Audrey. More introspective, more selective, stronger. The woman who had once been a shadow in a powerful man's life now became her own light. It wasn't that the pain had disappeared. It still came in waves, mostly at night. But it no longer defined her days. Audrey knew that one day Julian would have the right to know. But not now. Not while she is still in the process of rebuilding. First, she needed to remake herself. Then, she would decide if he had a place, or a right, to be a part of this new chapter. For now, it was just her and the boys. 3 hearts beating in a single body. 3 stories being born from an ending. The tears that didn't fall. Please subscribe to the channel, leave a comment with your thoughts, and share this video. The town in Maine welcomed her like a silent embrace. The cobblestone streets, the colorful houses with weathered wooden doors, the cafes smelling of fresh bread, and the warm breeze that carried the sound of bells and distant music created an atmosphere of reunion, not with other people, but with herself. Audrey arrived with few suitcases and a belly that was already starting to give away her secret. Here, no one knew her, and that was liberating. She rented a simple house with large windows that let the morning light flood the rooms. The kitchen was small but charming. The room was upstairs, with a view of the mountains. The neighborhood was quiet, made up of artists, retired gentlemen, and single mothers who looked at her with silent sympathy. For the first time in a long time, Audrey felt she didn't need to fake strength. She just needed to exist. The first weeks were slow. Her days were divided between light walks at dawn, trips to the local market, long readings in the shade of the trees in the town square, and, above all, silence. Not the silence of abandonment she had known with Julian, but a fertile silence, like a field preparing to bloom. It was the kind of quiet that allowed her to listen to herself again. It was on a rainy afternoon that writing returned, without warning, without planning. Audrey was sitting at the living room table, watching the water run down the window, when she felt a strange urgency in her hands. She picked up her notebook and began to write. It wasn't a story or a novel. It was a letter to herself, an intimate confession, a rescue. After that, she didn't stop. Over the next few months, she wrote every day. Sometimes very early, other times in the middle of the night when the babies seemed to be dancing inside her. Her words didn't come out as they used to, controlled, clean, politically correct. Now they came out raw, sometimes disorganized, sometimes fierce, but always true. She was writing her pain, yes, but also her reconstruction. Soon, the notebooks began to pile up. Audrey started typing them up on the old laptop she had brought. She thought maybe there was a book in there, not a book about motherhood or betrayal or romance, but about bravery, about continuing even when everything inside you wants to stop, about choosing yourself. And little by little, the project took shape. The town welcomed her with small gestures. The newspaper stand owner who always greeted her with a smile and saved literary copies for her. The bookstore owner who, upon learning Audrey was a writer, invited her to join a book club. The elderly neighbor who brought her cornbread one afternoon and stayed for hours talking about children and loss. This town, with its own rhythm, offered her a cure without hurry, without demands. As her belly grew, Audrey also grew, in strength, in clarity, in identity. She learned to assemble simple furniture, to care for the front garden, to prepare baby food even before the babies were born. And, more than anything, she learned to be alone without feeling lonely. There was sadness, yes, but it was no longer dominant. There was longing, but also hope. Her prenatal checkups became sacred moments. Seeing the forming faces, hearing two hearts beating inside her. It reminded her every day that she was creating lives, not just surviving. She started dreaming of names, of bedtime stories, of the first day of school. And in time, fear gave way to determination. These children would have everything she could give them. When she was 7 months along, she sat on the porch at sunset, a cup of tea in her hands, and the more than 100-page manuscript by her side. She watched the orange sky and smiled almost without realizing it. There, in that precise moment, she wasn't the betrayed woman, or the abandoned wife, or the forgotten writer. She was just Audrey, a mother, an author, a whole woman. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The silent return. The book was born before the children, almost like an emotional birth. Audrey finished the manuscript on a silent night, when a slight pain in her back announced that the end of gestation was approaching. She titled it, "The Tears That Didn't Fall," a tribute to the swallowed pain, the stifled screams, the nights when everything hurt inside. Her face remained serene. It was a raw book, unvarnished, a mirror of the soul. And for the first time, she didn't write to be accepted. She wrote to survive. The birth of the twins happened on a Sunday morning, under a sky filled with gray clouds and a cool breeze that entered the hospital in Maine like a blessing. Ethan came first, calm, almost solemn. Noah arrived shortly after, crying loudly, as if he already knew that life would be made of struggles. Both so different, yet united from the beginning. Audrey received them with tear-filled eyes, but not a single tear fell. She had learned to hold back the waters, and now she chose which ones to let flow. The first days were of total surrender, breastfeeding, changing, rocking, and repeating. Sleepless nights became routine, and Audrey's body no longer belonged to her. It was an instrument, a refuge, a comfort. But even in exhaustion, she felt a silent strength she never imagined she possessed. Every small gesture, the baby's sigh, an involuntary smile, the first gaze, was a spark of hope. She wrote when she could, sometimes between feedings, with the laptop on her lap and a child on her chest. Other times, she recorded voice notes for herself while walking with the stroller through the town center. The words returned, even in the midst of chaos. It was as if her identity insisted on not dying, even now, divided between diapers and postponed dreams. In time, Audrey decided to send the manuscript to a small, local publisher, almost without expectations. It was a friend from the book club who insisted, saying the world needed that story. 3 months later, she received the response. The book would be published. Not only that, it would be the publisher's literary bet of the year. The honesty of the text had deeply moved the editors, and with it also came an invitation for an interview in a national magazine. Her name was circulating again, now with a new story, a real, strong, unveiled story. Meanwhile, Ethan and Noah grew up healthy. Noah was restless, curious, and laughed easily. Ethan was more introspective, observant, but attached to details with a gentle sweetness. Audrey saw small traces of Julian in both of them, and sometimes that hurt. But it no longer pained her as it used to. It was a transformed pain, something she could now look at without anger, only with respect for what had happened. The book was launched in a small bookstore downtown, with a line for autographs and emotional readers. Some cried as they told her they had lived through similar betrayals. Others said they had found the courage to start over. Audrey signed each one, smiling with humility, as if she still didn't believe that the woman in front of the cameras was herself. That night, back at home, with the twins asleep and the newly launched book on her nightstand, Audrey allowed herself a moment of contemplation. She lit a candle, made a cup of tea, and looked at the ceiling. She wasn't thinking about Julian or the past. She was thinking about the present, about her children, about the silent peace of the house, about the sound of her own heart beating slowly. For the first time in years, she missed nothing. The tears that didn't fall no longer mattered, because in the end, it was that self-control that made her right. That made her reborn. That prepared her to be not only a mother or a writer, but someone who survived the storm and returned with a story to tell. And that story, now, was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone who had ever been shattered and chose to rebuild themselves with dignity, the ruin of a life. While Audrey was being reborn in silence, Julian was falling apart in noise. In the months following her departure, his life transformed into a succession of erratic decisions, impulsive reactions, and a gradual descent into chaos. The first loss came as a direct consequence of his emotional absence. His leadership in the company began to be questioned. Partners, once loyal, started acting on their own. Canceled meetings, votes of no confidence, ignored documents. In less than a year, Julian had lost control of the empire he built with his own hands. He tried to pretend that nothing had changed. He appeared at social events with different women, always smiling, always with a drink in his hand. But his gaze no longer sustained the character. Gala dinners became empty, conversations repetitive, alcoholic toasts more and more frequent. Alcohol, which had previously appeared only as a social prop, became a constant refuge. It started with discreet drinks in the office, then became bottles hidden in his car, at home, in hotels where he stayed alone. Friends, noticing the deterioration, tried to intervene. Some offered help, others disappeared. The oldest, who had known him since youth, pulled away with sadness. He had repelled them all without realizing it, with his constant denial and inability to ask for help. He didn't want advice, much less pity, and deep down, he may have believed he deserved every loss he accumulated. He started living in luxury hotels, changing rooms frequently, as if fleeing from himself. The penthouse he lived in with Audrey was put up for sale in a moment of anger and nostalgia, and he never went back. He threw away the paintings she had chosen, the books she had given him, even the blanket they used to watch movies on the sofa. He believed that by getting rid of the objects, he would get rid of the guilt. But it was the opposite. Each burned item left an even bigger hole. Mornings became the worst time of day. The hangover hurt more in his soul than in his body. The dark room, the tangled sheets, the smell of alcohol and cheap perfume. Everything was a reminder that he had become a shadow of the man he once pretended to be. Julian, the magnate, was now just Julian, and he didn't know what to do with that. He started avoiding mirrors. The image he saw reflected was grotesque. Red eyes, unkempt beard, disheveled clothes. Not even the most expensive suit could hide the emptiness. New secretaries feared him. Old executives avoided him. His figure, once a symbol of control, had become synonymous with silent ruin. The press, for its part, was unforgiving. Reports on his meteoric fall appeared in the business columns. Malicious comments on social media said he had gone crazy after a heartbreak. Julian read it all. And although he refused to admit it, those headlines hurt more than any professional criticism. Because it wasn't about numbers. It was about human failure. One particularly difficult night, he woke up to the sound of a glass breaking. He didn't know if he had knocked it over or thrown it against the wall. Stumbling, he fell to the floor, tasting the metallic flavor of blood in his mouth and the saltiness of tears that finally began to fall. For the first time, he cried without reservations. Not for what he had lost, but for what he had become. It was there, lying among shards and silence, that he finally understood. It wasn't Audrey who had abandoned him. He had abandoned himself much earlier. And now, with his life in ruins, the question persisted like a torturous mantra. Who is the man who remains when everything is taken away? The power, the prestige, the applause, the book of truth. It was just another morning. One of those Julian went through on autopilot. He had spent another night sleeping poorly, his eyes burning from a hangover, and his heart numbed by so many absences. The airport was a constant limbo in his life over the past few months. Boarding with no purpose, destinations with no real desire to arrive. This time, he was heading to Miami for a meeting with investors who had already decided to exclude him, but who still feigned cordiality. While waiting to board, Julian entered a bookstore, perhaps looking for a random magazine, anything to distract his eyes and silence his thoughts. He ran his fingers haphazardly over the spines until he stopped, frozen, in front of a book with a simple cover, but a title that seemed to shout, "The Tears That Didn't Fall." The author's name printed below, A. Miller, was like a dry blow to the stomach. A chill ran down his spine. He picked up the copy with trembling hands and flipped through it as if it were a sacred relic. In the dedication, for all who learned that silence can also scream, he knew. It was her, Audrey. And whatever was between those pages wasn't just literature. It was her heart. He bought the book without hesitation and boarded like a man possessed. During the flight, he couldn't take his eyes off the words. The narrative was raw, emotional, honest. It was like spying on a diary that shouldn't be read, but still begged to be understood. Audrey spoke of a woman in love with an emotionally absent man, of the loneliness of loving in silence, of the trauma of betrayal, of the strength that is born when everything crumbles. Page after page, Julian recognized himself, not just as a character, but as the antagonist. He realized with horror that the real villain of the story wasn't the physical betrayal, but the emotional neglect, the subtle selfishness, the pride camouflaged as rationality. He hadn't just been the man who betrayed. He had been the man who abandoned her long before he left, who ignored signs, who silenced truths, who never had the courage to be whole. The fragment that tore him apart the most was the one where Audrey described the moment she realized that her love for him was no longer hope, but resistance. I still loved him, but loving someone who doesn't see you, who doesn't hear you, who is afraid of his own soul, is like loving a statue. Cold, beautiful, but unable to hug you. Julian closed the book with tears silently streaming down his face. For the first time, he didn't feel betrayed for having been exposed. He felt naked before his own truth. Upon landing, he felt like a different person, not in the sense of someone renewed, but as someone who finally sees the disaster after the storm. He couldn't go to the meeting. He took the first flight back to Chicago, locked himself in a cheap hotel room, and reread the book, this time taking notes on fragments, underlining words, as if studying a map to find his way back to himself. The next morning, he stared at the ceiling for hours. He thought about how she had written everything without hatred, with a devastating compassion. She didn't humiliate him. She only exposed him, showing both of them as they really were. Flawed, human, hurt. But she showed something even more disturbing, that she had moved on without him. And that crushed him more than any revenge. At the foot of the bed, with the closed book on his chest, Julian understood something he had never had the courage to face. The pain we cause others often comes from the cowardice of not facing our own pain. And now, if he wanted any forgiveness, or even to deserve to see the children he didn't know he had, he would have to do something he had never done in his life, rebuild himself from the inside out. The man who came back the next day, Julian woke up differently. For the first time in years, he had a goal that wasn't tied to profits, image, or control. It was visceral, almost primitive. He needed to see Audrey, not to beg for forgiveness, although he knew he would, but to face head-on what he had destroyed. After weeks of discreet investigation, he knew where she lived. The charming coastal town in Maine. The town where, without him, she had been reborn. He got in his car and drove down the winding roads with a pounding heart. He had rehearsed 1,000 times what he would say, but deep down, he knew that no phrase would be enough. He carried the marked book with him, his beard shaved, and a childlike anxiety in his chest. He didn't expect a reconciliation. He hoped, perhaps, for just the chance to show that he was no longer the man who had hurt her. When he arrived, he parked in front of a modest house with a white facade and blue windows, surrounded by blooming bougainvillea. It was simple, but alive. Everything about it pulsed with presence, with truth. Julian hesitated. For a second, he felt like turning back. But then, the door opened. Audrey appeared on the threshold in an apron tied at her waist and an expression of quiet astonishment. Her eyes, for a brief moment, widened, but then they narrowed slightly, as if recognizing not the man in front of her, but the history he carried. She said nothing. She just crossed her arms, waiting for him to speak. Julian couldn't find the words. No speech would make sense. He looked at her, so different, and yet so much herself. She had her hair pulled back simply, her face without makeup, but there was a new strength in the way she stood, centered. She was a complete woman, independent, serene. And yet, there was a shadow of sadness in her eyes, not from recent pain, but from nostalgia for what could have been and wasn't. "I read your book," he finally said in a hoarse voice. "Every word, and—" He paused, his voice trembling. "I didn't come to ask you to forgive me. I came to thank you for showing me who I was." Audrey listened in silence. Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She had already cried everything before. The silence between them was dense, but no longer destructive. It was the silence of someone who has survived the worst and is now on neutral ground. Finally, she spoke. "Did you come for yourself or for them?" Julian frowned, confused. It was then that two children's voices resonated from inside the house. Twins, two boys. He saw them for the first time as they ran to the door, hugging their mother's legs. The world stopped. He stumbled a step backward. They were there. His children. Alive. Beautiful. Too young to understand what was happening, but old enough to change everything. Audrey knelt, stroked each boy's hair, and stood up firmly. "These are Ethan and Noah, and before you say anything, I'm going to be clear. They don't need a half-hearted father. If you want to know them, you're going to have to prove, to yourself, that you are worthy of it." Julian, his eyes teary, and his voice caught in his throat, could only nod. In that moment, he understood that there was no easy redemption. There were no shortcuts. But there, in front of her, and the children he didn't dream he had, he understood. This was his chance to start over, not with words, with actions, walking towards forgiveness. In the days following that visit, Julian didn't immediately return. He needed time to absorb the impact, not just of seeing Audrey again, but of meeting the sons he hadn't known existed for the first time. Ethan and Noah. Two names that carried weight and beauty. Two little boys who, without even knowing him, had reconfigured his entire existence. Upon returning to Chicago, he sat amidst his own ruins. The empty penthouse, the tarnished name, the lost business. For the first time, he had the clarity that none of it mattered anymore. 2 weeks later, he returned to Maine. This time, without arrogance, without a grandiose plan. Just with a simple suitcase and a plea to be heard. Audrey received him in the garden of the house, like someone receiving a visitor, not an ex-husband. The boys were with a neighbor. She didn't offer him coffee or sit in the shade with him. She stood, with her arms crossed, firm. "If you want to be a father, Julian, you have to understand one thing," she began bluntly. "This has nothing to do with me. I don't need you. The boys don't either, not yet. But they deserve the opportunity to know you. Only that opportunity can't be partial. I don't want occasional visits or nice apologies. They're going to watch you. They're going to test your presence. And it will only work if you're here, with consistency." He took a deep breath. He didn't try to negotiate. He didn't ask for time. He just replied, "I'll stay." That's how his second life change began. He left the city behind, sold what was left of the penthouse, terminated contracts, and cut ties with everything that represented his old self. He settled in a simple inn on the outskirts of the town, away from the center, near the hills. He woke up early, took long walks, and every day he wrote small reflections in an old notebook, things he was learning about himself, about silence, about loss, about love without bargaining. The first week, Audrey didn't allow him contact with the boys. She said she wanted to observe him first, and Julian understood. He started looking for small jobs in the community. He helped in a school garden, carried boxes in a library, did maintenance at the local church. No one there knew him as the businessman. Here, he was just Julian, and that both disoriented and liberated him. Audrey watched him from a distance. She saw when he wiped his face with the sleeve of his sweaty shirt, when he left food at the elderly neighbor's door, when he sat quietly on the edge of the square without his phone, just watching the world go by. There was no rush in him, no apologies, just presence. In the second week, she invited him over for a snack. Ethan and Noah were curious but wary. Audrey had prepared them, telling them who he was. With calm honesty, Julian looked at them with reverence. He didn't try to hold them. He sat on the floor beside them and listened intently when Noah showed him a drawing. Ethan didn't say much. He just watched. But at the end of the afternoon, he dropped a toy in Julian's lap. A subtle gesture, but full of meaning. That day, as he walked back to the inn, Julian smiled. Not because he was winning something back, but because he was, finally, building himself. Brick by brick. And the only thing that resonated in his mind was the phrase Audrey had said when he was leaving. Love, when it's real, doesn't demand shortcuts. It demands the courage to stay. The courage to stay. Julian started from the bottom. Literally. The first job he got in town was as an assistant at a small artisanal bakery, washing pans and sweeping the floor after the last batch of bread. There was no glamour or recognition, and certainly no Italian suits. Just flour, silence, and the opportunity to be useful. At first, he felt shame. Every customer who came in, he feared being recognized, but no one saw him as the bankrupt businessman. There, he was just Julian, and little by little, that started to be enough. In parallel, he began therapy, not out of obligation, but out of necessity. He found a local psychologist recommended by a library employee. The first session was uncomfortable. He sat with his arms crossed, avoiding eye contact, trying to control his words. But with time, his defenses gave way. He cried. He laughed nervously. He confessed fears he had never dared to name. He started to understand that his whole life had been built to avoid pain, and, ironically, that's what had multiplied it. Each week, he left the sessions a little lighter. He also started writing again, as the therapist suggested. Letters he would never send. Texts that told his version of the story, not to justify, but to understand. I was absent because I thought presence was surrender, but surrender requires courage, and I never had that. He wrote on one of the pages. He kept everything in a cardboard box by the bed, like someone collecting evidence of his transformation. On Sundays, Audrey allowed him to spend a few hours with the boys. At first, the interactions were shy. Noah talked non-stop, asking difficult questions like, "Why did you leave? Are you going to disappear again? Do you know how to play, or do we need to teach you?" Julian answered calmly, swallowing his discomfort, often not knowing what to say, but never lying. And that honesty, little by little, won over the restless boy. Noah began to call him Daddy naturally, in the middle of a game or while sharing a cookie. It was spontaneous, real. Ethan was more resistant. He didn't reject him, but he didn't get close either. He watched everything with serious eyes that were too mature for his age. He would sit next to him, but never on his lap. He listened to stories, but rarely asked questions. Julian realized that with Ethan, he needed time. Trust wasn't earned with promises, but with silent presence. So he waited. He would sit next to the boy on rainy Sundays, in silence, just drawing with him or organizing the toy cars by color, as Ethan liked to do. The first moment of connection came unexpectedly. They were in the yard, and Julian noticed that Ethan always avoided touching the dirt. So, in a deliberate gesture, he dug with his hands and said, "When I was a kid, I was also afraid to get my hands dirty. My dad said it was for weak people." Ethan looked at him, attentive. "And what did you do?" "I pretended I didn't care, but I cared a lot." Ethan said nothing, but he knelt beside him and, for the first time, touched the dirt with his own fingers. It wasn't an explosion of affection. It was a small gesture. But for Julian, it was as if his son had opened a crack of trust for him. From that day on, he began to notice small changes. Ethan accepted when Julian invited him to ride his bike. He started laughing at Noah's silly jokes when they were together, and one night, he fell asleep, leaning on his shoulder. Audrey watched everything from a distance but didn't interfere. She knew that the construction of that bond was between them. She admired Julian's patience. The man who had once been so rushed for everything now learned the rhythm of his children, a rhythm that couldn't be hurried or bought, only lived. The small miracles. Saturday mornings became the three of their favorite times. They would go to the farmer's market together, where Julian would let them choose fruits, taste cheeses, and share a sweet treat at the end. Noah, with a chocolate-smeared mouth, would laugh heartily and playfully push Ethan, who would respond with timid tickles. It was simple. It was daily. But for Julian, it was sacred. There were also difficult moments. One night, Noah had a nightmare and ran to his mom's room. Seeing Julian there on the sofa, he hesitated. Audrey looked at him and, without a word, gave him a small nod. Noah then threw himself into his father's arms, crying softly. Julian hugged him tightly, feeling his heart ache. Not from his son's crying, but because in that moment he understood the weight and beauty of being a refuge. With Ethan, the final test came one afternoon when the boy, without looking directly at him, mumbled, "When you're not here, I miss you." Julian contained his emotion, swallowed his tears, and only replied, "I miss you too." Every day. Julian's transformation didn't happen in a spectacular way. It wasn't marked by a grand gesture or an epic declaration. It happened slowly, in the rhythm of real life, in the small choices, in the silent habits, in the decisions that only an attentive observer would notice. Julian learned that loving wasn't about impressing. It was about persisting. It wasn't about giving speeches. It was about being there every day, even when he wasn't invited, even when no one noticed. He started cooking for the boys. He began with stuck rice and disastrous pancakes, but soon mastered the basics. He learned to make Noah's favorite oatmeal and the mild tomato sauce that Ethan would eat without complaining. Each meal prepared was a wordless love letter. Around the table, he began to hear laughter and confidences. He discovered that the stomach was also a path to affection. On cold mornings, it was he who took the boys to school. He woke up before the sun, packed their lunches, and checked their backpacks. The twins began to trust his presence as a constant, no longer as a visit, but as a pillar. The other parents, once curious or skeptical, started greeting him naturally. At the park, Julian was no longer the stranger. He was the dad who pushed the swing, who helped up those who fell, who laughed at their absurd stories with a smile that now came from within. With Audrey, the relationship became respectful, silent, beautiful. He didn't force conversations. He didn't try to rescue a past. He simply helped her. He washed the dishes after the boys' dinner, fixed the squeaky gate, stayed with the children when she needed to go to literary events. He never complained, never expected anything in return. He was just present. One night, when Audrey returned from a public reading, she found Julian in the living room, reading to Ethan and Noah. He used different voices for each character and laughed heartily when the boys corrected him. Audrey stood in the doorway, watching. Her heart ached, not with pain, but with a sweet nostalgia. He was there, truly there, and not for her, but for his children, for himself. Another memorable moment came when Noah fell off his bike and scraped his knee. Julian ran, picked him up, blew on the wound, and said calmly, "It's going to be okay, son. I'm here." Noah stopped crying almost immediately. It wasn't the bandage that calmed him. It was the certainty of that firm, consistent, reliable presence. Julian began writing again. Short texts about fatherhood, about new beginnings. Not for publication, at least not yet. It was a way of dialoguing with himself. He recorded his progress, his mistakes, his fears. He wrote with honesty, as he learned by observing Audrey. His words, once cold and strategic, now had warmth, had a voice, had a soul. Little by little, he began to be recognized in the town, not as the declining businessman, but as someone who had decided to truly change. The local priest invited him to help with troubled youth. The librarian called him to speak at a group for separated parents. He accepted each invitation with humility, not as a redeemer, but as someone who knew the weight of error and the value of effort. And on a typical afternoon, while walking with Ethan on one side and Noah on the other, Julian realized that they no longer asked him to come. They took his presence for granted, and that, for him, was more valuable than any forgiveness. Because being there, truly being there, was love in its most concrete form. The first crack. Please leave your opinion on this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it, and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also move you. Don't miss it. Audrey was never a woman of impulsive decisions. She always observed first. She felt, she analyzed, she stayed silent before acting. That's why, over the months that Julian was transforming before her eyes, she said nothing. She just watched. Every gesture, every respectful silence, every patient step he took with the boys was a brick in the slow dismantling of the wall she had built to protect herself. But she still wondered, what if he breaks everything again? It was a legitimate fear, one of those that remains as a scar, even after healing. Audrey knew how much she had struggled to rebuild herself, alone, pregnant in the darkness, and she was afraid that any opening, however small, would put her back at the mercy of someone who had already destroyed her once before. But something inside her was beginning to give way, not because of the man Julian had been, but because of the man he was visibly striving to be now. She noticed the subtle changes, how he now listened calmly before responding, how he accepted his children's corrections without wounded pride, how he cared for their routine with responsibility and affection without expecting recognition. He wasn't seeking a reward, just presence. And that, for Audrey, was the clearest sign that something in him had, in fact, changed. On a cloudy afternoon, Audrey watched from the window as he swept dry leaves from the yard with Ethan. They both wore rain boots, concentrated, and Noah ran around with a bucket in his hand, trying to help. The scene was mundane, and because of that, so powerful. It was there, in that unheroic everyday life, where Julian was becoming real. Present, a father, and perhaps a man again. Later that same night, Audrey invited him to have dinner with them. It wasn't the first time, but there was something different in her tone. He noticed. The four of them sat at the table. She had prepared vegetable soup and artisanal bread. Julian helped serve. He told silly jokes to distract the boys, and when they were all finished, he took the plates to the sink without anyone asking him to. She said nothing, but she noticed. After putting the boys to bed, Audrey went out onto the porch with a blanket over her shoulders. Julian appeared a few minutes later, bringing 2 cups of tea. She looked at him, surprised, and he just smiled. "Chamomile. I remember you used to say it helped you sleep after a long day." They sat next to each other, the silence between them filled not with tension, but with something new, both familiar and strong. Audrey, her eyes fixed on the sky, murmured, "You seem like a different person." "Maybe I just stopped running from the person I could be," he replied without hesitation. There was a silence after that. She didn't react with praise or resistance. She just let the phrase hang in the air, but her shoulders relaxed slightly. Julian didn't try to move forward. He didn't get any closer. He just stayed there. With her. As before, and yet, as never before. It was in that instant that Audrey realized that the anger she had carried no longer burned. Fear still existed, yes, but now it shared space with something tenuous and ineffable. Hope. Not the hope of returning to the past. She didn't want that. But of, who knows, building a different future, on new foundations. There was no grand scene, no confession in the rain, no cinematic kiss at sunset. The love between Audrey and Julian, if it was being reborn, was doing so like plants that grow in the cracks of concrete, discreetly, almost unnoticed, but with a force that defies all odds. There were no guarantees. There was only presence, and that, for both of them, was more than enough. A second chance. Julian wasn't trying to win Audrey back. He didn't bring her flowers, make promises, or talk about reconciliation. All he did was be there. He woke up early, helped with the children, read stories, washed the dishes, and fixed what was broken. He was a constant, quietly reliable presence. And in time, Audrey began to notice that he wasn't doing it for her. He was doing it for himself, for Ethan, for Noah, for a more decent future than the past that had crushed them. Audrey, for her part, continued to guard her heart, but not with the rigidity of before. She began to allow herself to smile more. She spent more time next to Julian, talking about neutral things. The children's school, recipes, books. Sometimes, their eyes would meet for a second longer than necessary, but neither of them forced the next step. They were at peace with the slowness. Julian continued his therapy, his notebooks of reflections, and now he was writing small stories inspired by fathers and sons. He never showed them to anyone, but Audrey had found one of them, forgotten on the table. She read it in silence, and for the first time, she cried. Not from sadness, but from recognizing a man who had learned to feel. One afternoon, Noah asked directly, "Mommy, can Daddy live here with us?" Audrey, surprised, replied carefully, "Daddy has his own little house, honey, and he's always close. That's not the most important thing." Noah thought for a bit, and then said, "Yes, he's always here." That always here was what Audrey both feared and wanted most. The fear of giving in and being hurt again still existed. But now, there was also the certainty that Julian was different. Not because he wanted something in return, but because he had finally understood the value of things that couldn't be bought. Time, respect, connection. One Saturday night, after the children were asleep, Audrey invited Julian to sit on the sofa. They didn't say much. They watched an old movie in silence. At the end, he got up to leave, and she lightly touched his arm. She didn't stop him. She just touched him. A small gesture that said a lot. "You haven't come back yet, but maybe you're on your way." As she closed the door behind him, Audrey rested her forehead against the wood and took a deep breath. She was tired of being strong alone, And maybe, just maybe, she was ready to be strong next to someone again. Julian, on the other side of the door, walked down the silent street with an accelerated heart. There were no promises, no ready-made happy endings. But there was something that had never existed between them before, a love that didn't run, that walked, and step by step, it was building a space where before there had only been ruin. The final words. On a morning when the sky was clear, but a light mist made the sunlight soft, almost melancholic. Julian woke up early, as he had for the past several months. But he felt something different inside him, a serene restlessness, as if he was finally ready to close a cycle that still hurt silently. It wasn't a special day, no memorable date. But for him, it was time. The time to, finally, say what he never had the courage to say. He stopped by Audrey's house in the late afternoon. She received him on the porch, with the boys playing in the yard, under the watchful eye of their grandmother, who had come to stay for a few days. Audrey wore no makeup. Her hair was loose, and she held a cup of tea. She was beautiful, not because she had dressed up, but because she seemed at peace with herself. And that, for Julian, had always been the most powerful form of beauty. "Can we talk?" he asked in a low voice. Audrey nodded and gestured for him to sit next to her on the wooden porch bench. There was a moment of silence before Julian began. He didn't have a rehearsed speech, nor did he carry letters or theatrical gestures. He carried only his vulnerability, and that was everything. "I spent my whole life running from words," he said, looking straight ahead, not at her. "I learned that feeling was a weakness, that showing pain was dangerous. So I kept quiet. I kept quiet when you told me you were tired, when I saw you cry in silence, when you wordlessly asked me to be truly there, and I didn't know how. I hid behind work, behind numbers, behind the mask of a successful man. And in the end, I lost everything that truly mattered." Audrey didn't interrupt. She just listened, her eyes fixed on him now, attentive, unhurried. "I cheated on you, yes," he continued. "But before that, I hurt you every day that I refused to see you. I denied you not with words, but with absence. And today I understand that was worse than any physical mistake, because it was continuous, because it killed something inside you. And for a long time, I hated myself for that. I thought I would never be able to fix it, but now I don't want to fix anything. I just want to give you back the truth you always deserved." He then turned and faced her. "I loved you, in my wrong, clumsy, fearful way, but I loved you. And it's only now that I understand how much true love requires courage. Thank you for not letting me destroy you. Thank you for protecting our children from the worst of me. And," he took a deep breath, "forgive me, not for me, but for you, so you don't have to carry this anymore." Audrey's eyes were teary. She hadn't cried in a long time, but those words, the ones he had never said before, the ones she had waited so long for and then given up on hearing, had a liberating weight. Not because they promised a return, but because they closed a cycle, a period of mourning, a history. "I don't know what's going to happen between us," he said finally, "and I didn't come here expecting anything. I just needed, after all this time, to give you the words I never said, because you deserve every one of them, and because I can only move on if I don't leave anything unfinished." Audrey took a deep breath. She closed her eyes for an instant, and then replied in a serene voice, "Thank you for saying them now. Even if it's late, they still have value." Then she looked at him, with tenderness, with memory, with something close to acceptance. "Maybe we won't be what we were, but maybe, just maybe, we can discover who we can be now, without rush, without ties." Julian smiled for the first time without guilt, a clean smile. And there, under the lavender sky of that town that had been the setting for so many new beginnings. Two people who had once been lost finally found each other, not as a couple, but as two whole human beings, ready, at last, to begin again. I invite you to leave your opinion on this incredible story in the comments. If you liked it, share it, and subscribe to the channel to support our work. Another story is appearing on your screen that will probably also move you. Don't miss it.
Look at Camden's shoes, they're falling apart. 10-year-old Camden Blackwood froze as laughter erupted around him. His gaze dropped to his worn-out sneakers, the duct tape he'd carefully applied that morning now peeling away to reveal a gaping hole. The pristine marble floors of Westfield Academy seemed to magnify his inadequacy as his classmates circled him like sharks sensing blood. "My father says your family is living on charity," jeered Oliver Prescott, the ringleader of the pack. "He says your scholarship is just a handout because the school feels sorry for you." Camden's ears burned hot with shame. His threadbare uniform, a hand-me-down 3 sizes too large, hung off his skinny frame, a constant reminder that he didn't belong among the children of Manhattan's elite. "Leave me alone," Camden muttered, clutching his second-hand textbooks tighter against his chest. "Or what? You'll call your father? Oh, wait." Oliver's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "He's too busy being nobody." Something snapped inside Camden. The books tumbled from his arms as he lunged at Oliver, his fist connecting with the boy's perfectly straight nose. Warm blood splattered across the marble floor. "Camden Blackwood!" The headmaster's voice boomed through the hallway. "My office, now. 15 years later. Mr. Blackwood, your 9 a.m. is here." Camden Blackwood didn't look up from the financial reports spread across his massive glass desk. At 35, he'd transformed from that desperate scholarship kid into New York's most ruthless business tycoon. His corner office on the 92nd floor of the Blackwood Tower offered a panoramic view of the city he now owned piece by piece. "Tell Oliver Prescott I'll see him when I'm ready," Camden replied, his voice as cold as the steel beams supporting his empire. "Let him wait." "Yes, sir," his assistant replied, retreating silently. Camden allowed himself a thin smile. Oliver Prescott, once the golden child of Manhattan society, was now on the verge of bankruptcy, coming to beg for a job from the boy whose shoes he had once mocked. Camden had spent 15 years methodically acquiring companies, properties, and power, all building toward moments like this. His phone buzzed. Without looking, he knew it would be another executive at Blackwood Enterprises requesting an extension on an impossible deadline. Camden had earned his nickname, the Executioner, by showing no mercy, whether to competitors or his own employees. "Blackwood," he answered curtly. "Camden, listen," came the desperate voice of his CFO. "The Wellington merger team needs more time. They've been working 20-hour days for weeks." "Then they should work 22, Camden interrupted. "The Wellington acquisition closes Friday. If your team can't handle it, I'll find people who can." He ended the call without waiting for a response. Rising from his chair, Camden adjusted his bespoke Tom Ford suit, a far cry from the oversized hand-me-downs of his youth. He approached the floor-to-ceiling windows surveying the city below. Each glittering skyscraper represented another piece of his revenge against a world that had once dismissed him. The intercom buzzed again. "Sir, there's also a young woman here. She doesn't have an appointment, but she insists on seeing you. A Ms. Luna Morales?" Camden frowned. The name meant nothing to him. "Tell her to make an appointment like everyone else. Sir, she's quite persistent. She says it's personal and urgent." Camden despised disruptions to his meticulously planned schedule. "Fine. 5 minutes. Then escort Oliver in." The door opened, and Camden turned, expecting to dismiss this intrusion quickly. Instead, he found himself facing a petite woman with fierce dark eyes and wild curls barely contained in a messy bun. Her clothing, a faded denim jacket over a waitress uniform, was jarringly out of place against the minimalist luxury of his office. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her chin tilted defiantly upward to meet his gaze. "You probably don't remember me, but 3 months ago you hosted a charity gala at the Platinum Room. I was your server." Camden's expression remained impassive. He didn't waste mental space remembering service staff. "I see," he replied flatly. "And you're here because—" Luna Morales took a deep breath, her hands unconsciously moving to rest on her stomach in a protective gesture that Camden didn't miss. "I'm here because I'm pregnant," she announced, her voice steady despite the bomb she was dropping. "And you're the father." Camden Blackwood, the man New York business magazines called the Iceman, felt his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. "Pregnant?" Camden's voice was barely audible. For the first time in years, he found himself genuinely stunned. "That's impossible." Luna Morales raised an eyebrow. "The doctor and 3 pregnancy tests disagree with you." "I meant," Camden said, regaining his composure, "that I always take precautions." "Well, congratulations, Mr. Blackwood. You've managed to defy statistics." Luna's casual tone belied the gravity of the situation. "Look, I'm not here to trap you or demand marriage. I just thought you should know." Camden circled his desk, unconsciously putting the barrier between them. "How do I know it's mine?" The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Luna's face flushed with anger. "Because unlike the socialites you usually entertain, I don't make a habit of sleeping with billionaires in coat closets." She turned toward the door. This was a mistake. "Wait." Camden wasn't sure why he stopped her. Logic dictated he should let her leave, have his lawyers handle this mess. But something in her fierce dignity struck a chord. "Sit down, please." 3 months earlier, Luna Morales balanced 5 champagne flutes on her tray as she weaved through Manhattan's elite at the Children's Hospital charity gala. The irony wasn't lost on her. serving drinks to people who spent more on a single night out than she made in a month, all while she struggled to pay her own mounting medical bills. "Another circuit, Morales," barked her supervisor. "The East Terrace needs refreshments." Luna nodded, suppressing a wince as pain shot through her lower back. The double shifts were taking their toll. But with her grandmother's Parkinson's medication costs doubling last month, she had no choice. The Platinum Room's East Terrace offered a breathtaking view of the city skyline, the twinkling lights like a carpet of stars below the real ones above. Luna paused for a moment, allowing herself to imagine a different life, one where she wasn't 3 months behind on rent for the cramped Queens apartment she shared with her grandmother and teenage brother. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Luna startled, nearly dropping her tray. A tall man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo stood beside her, gazing at the skyline. She recognized him immediately from the enormous portrait in the lobby. Camden Blackwood, tonight's host and the owner of the Platinum Room, along with half of Manhattan if rumors were to be believed. "Yes, sir. It is." Luna shifted awkwardly, unsure of the protocol for speaking to the boss's boss's boss. "I used to look at this view from down there," he said, pointing to a neighborhood in the distance. "From a one-bedroom apartment I shared with my mother. I used to promise her someday we'd be up here instead." His voice carried an unexpected vulnerability that contradicted everything she'd heard about the notorious executioner. Before Luna could respond, a commotion erupted inside. A server had spilled red wine on a guest's designer gown, and the woman's shrieks could be heard even over the orchestra. "You clumsy fool," the woman screamed. "Do you know how much this Valentino costs? You'll be paying for this with your pathetic salary for the next decade." Luna watched as the young server, a college student named Miguel who had helped her learn the ropes, trembled with fear. The manager was already rushing over, apologies spilling from his lips. "Excuse me," Luna said to Blackwood, hurrying inside. "It was an accident," Miguel was explaining, his voice shaking. The gentleman stepped backward. "I did no such thing," protested the man in question. "It doesn't matter how it happened," the manager hissed. "You're fired. Leave now." Luna pushed forward. "It wasn't his fault. I saw what happened." All eyes turned to her, including Camden Blackwood's, who had followed her inside. "The lady bumped into him while taking a selfie," Luna continued, her heart pounding but voice steady. Miguel tried to avoid her, but she spun around suddenly. The woman's face contorted with rage. "How dare you? Do you know who I am?" "Someone who needs to learn basic human decency," Luna suggested before she could stop herself. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The manager looked apoplectic. "Ms. Morales, you're fired too, both of you out now." "No one is getting fired." Camden Blackwood's authoritative voice cut through the tension. The room fell silent. "Accidents happen. The Platinum Room will cover any cleaning costs, Mrs. Prescott." The woman, apparently Mrs. Prescott, looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. "Camden, darling, you can't be serious. Your staff is atrocious." "My staff is hardworking and honest." His eyes met Luna's briefly. "Two qualities I value above all others. Now I believe the auction is about to begin." The crowd dispersed, the drama forgotten as quickly as it had erupted. Luna released the breath she'd been holding. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Miguel whispered before hurrying away. Luna turned to thank her unexpected savior, but found him watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. "Not many people would risk their job for a colleague," he observed. Luna shrugged. "Not many billionaires would stand up for their servers." His lips twitched. "Touché," he extended, his hand. "Camden Blackwood." "I know who you are," Luna replied, reluctantly shaking it. "Luna Morales." "Well, Luna Morales, I think you've earned a break. Care to join me for some air? The coat room balcony has a better view than the terrace and fewer socialites taking selfies." Luna knew she should decline. She'd heard the rumors about Blackwood's ruthlessness in business and his string of model girlfriends. But something in his eyes, a flicker of that same vulnerability she'd glimpsed earlier, made her nod. 5 minutes, she agreed. Then Need to get back to work. 5 minutes turned into an hour of surprisingly easy conversation. Camden Blackwood, it turned out, was nothing like his public persona. He spoke of growing up poor, of working 3 jobs to put himself through college, of the small bookstore his mother had once dreamed of opening. "What about you?" he asked. "You don't seem like a career server." Luna laughed. "I'm working on my nursing degree. 2 more semesters if I can keep up with tuition payments. Nursing? That's admirable. It's practical. My grandmother raised me after my parents died. She's sick now, Parkinson's. I want to be able to care for her properly." Luna was surprised by her own candor. Something about the intimate darkness of the balcony, the city lights below, made confessions feel natural. When Camden's hand found hers, she didn't pull away. When he leaned in to kiss her, she met him halfway. And when he whispered, "Stay with me tonight," against her lips, she found herself saying yes to something she'd never done before. A one-night stand with a man she barely knew but somehow felt she'd always known. The next morning, she slipped away while he slept, leaving no note, no number. Fairy tales weren't for girls from Queens with dying grandmothers and mountains of debt. That night had been stolen magic, nothing more, until the morning sickness started 3 weeks later. Present day. "How's your grandmother?" Camden asked quietly. Luna blinked in surprise. "You remember that?" "I remember everything about that night." His eyes held hers. "Why didn't you leave your number?" Luna laughed, the sound brittle. "Because men like you don't date waitresses from Queens, they just sleep with them. I wasn't interested in being your charity case or secret fling." Camden flinched as if she'd struck him. "Is that what you think happened?" "Doesn't matter what happened. What matters is this." She gestured to her stomach. "I'm keeping the baby, with or without your involvement. I just thought you had the right to know." Camden walked to the window, his back to her. Luna studied his reflection in the glass, the rigid posture, the clenched jaw. The man the business world feared, who could devastate companies with a single phone call, looked oddly vulnerable against the backdrop of the city he owned. "I want a paternity test," he said finally. Luna rose, dignity intact despite the tears threatening to spill. "Of course you do. Have your lawyers contact me." She placed a business card on his desk. "That's my address and phone number. Good day, Mr. Blackwood." As she reached the door, his voice stopped her again. "Luna." She turned, one hand protectively over her stomach. When the test confirms it's mine," Camden said, his voice oddly rough, "I want to be involved, fully involved." Luna's eyes widened. Of all the reactions she'd anticipated, this wasn't one of them. "Why?" she asked, genuinely bewildered. Camden's gaze drifted to a small framed photo on his desk, the only personal item in the sterile office. A worn photo of a woman with his eyes and smile. "Because," he said quietly, "I know what it's like to grow up with only one parent. And while my mother was everything to me, there were times I..." He stopped, vulnerability vanishing behind his mask of control. "The appointment for the test will be tomorrow. My driver will pick you up." It wasn't quite an answer, but Luna nodded. As she left, Camden Blackwood's assistant gave her a curious look, while Oliver Prescott, the man still waiting outside, stared open-mouthed at the waitress emerging from the office of New York's most inaccessible billionaire. Neither noticed the tiny smile playing at the corners of Luna's lips, or the way Camden watched her departure through the glass walls of his empire, his expression unreadable to everyone but her. The black Bentley idled outside Luna's apartment building in Queens, looking as out of place as a peacock in a chicken coop. Neighbors peered through curtains as Luna, wearing her best and only dress, suitable for a doctor's appointment with a billionaire, hurried down the crumbling steps. Camden's driver, a stoic man introduced only as Jones, held the door for her with a nod that revealed nothing of his thoughts about his boss's latest passenger. Luna slid into the butter-soft leather-back seat, half expecting to find Camden there. Instead, she found herself alone with a note on the opposite seat. Meeting ran late. We'll meet you at the clinic. CB. Of course. She'd been naive to think he'd personally escort her. This was business for him, a potential liability to be verified and managed. The ride to Manhattan was surreal. Luna watched her neighborhood, with its vibrant murals, busy bodegas, and resilient spirit, fade away, replaced by the gleaming towers of wealth and privilege. Two worlds, separated by a bridge and an economic chasm wider than the East River. The clinic wasn't what she expected. No sterile hospital corridors or crowded waiting room. Instead, the Bentley stopped at a discreet brownstone on the Upper East Side with a small brass plaque reading, Dr. Eleanor Whitman, M.D. Jones opened her door. Mr. Blackwood is already inside. The interior was elegant but warm, more like a luxury spa than a medical facility. A receptionist greeted Luna by name without asking who she was, and led her to a private room where Camden stood gazing out the window, tension evident in his shoulders. He turned at her entrance, and Luna was struck by how different he looked, in casual clothes. Dark jeans and a simple gray sweater that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but somehow made him seem more human. "You came," he said, as if he'd half expected her to change her mind. "I said I would." Luna removed her coat. "Is this really necessary? The doctor at my clinic already confirmed." "This isn't about not believing you," Camden interrupted. "It's about doing things properly from the start." He hesitated. "Dr. Whitman is the best obstetric specialist in New York. While we're here, she'll do a complete prenatal workup. I've arranged for her to take over your care." Luna bristled. "You had no right." "Good morning." A striking woman in her 50s entered, her warm smile diffusing the tension. "I'm Dr. Whitman. You must be Ms. Morales." Over the next hour, Luna endured the most comprehensive medical examination of her life. Blood drawn, ultrasound performed, medical history taken. Through it all, Camden remained in the room, asking more questions than Luna herself and looking strangely fascinated by the grainy ultrasound image of what currently resembled a lima bean more than a baby. "Everything looks perfect," Dr. Whitman finally announced. "You're exactly 12 weeks along, Ms. Morales. The paternity results will take a few days, but..." "That won't be necessary," Camden interrupted, surprising both women. His eyes met Luna's. "I know it's mine." Dr. Whitman tactfully excused herself, leaving them alone with the rhythmic sound of their baby's heartbeat still echoing in the room. "How can you be so sure?" Luna asked quietly. Camden's gaze remained on the frozen ultrasound image. "Because you're not the type to lie about something like this, and because..." He hesitated. "I haven't been with anyone else since that night." Luna tried to mask her surprise. The tabloids regularly linked him to models and actresses. "Don't believe everything you read," he said, correctly interpreting her expression. "The Camden Blackwood in those stories is a carefully crafted persona. And which Camden Blackwood is sitting here now?" He smiled faintly. "I'm still figuring that out myself." The Bentley ride after the appointment was silent until Camden suddenly instructed Jones to take a detour. "Where are we going?" Luna asked as they turned away from the route to Queens. "There's something I want to show you." 20 minutes later, they pulled up before a modest brownstone in a gentrifying Brooklyn neighborhood. Unlike Camden's gleaming corporate tower, this building had character. Worn stone steps, a small garden struggling to survive between concrete, windows that had witnessed a century of New York life. "What is this place?" Luna asked as Camden led her inside. The answer was immediately obvious. Bookshelves lined every wall of the renovated ground floor, with cozy reading nooks nestled between stacks. The scent of fresh coffee mingled with the distinctive aroma of new and old books. "Blackwood books," Camden said, watching her reaction carefully. "My newest acquisition. It's not open to the public yet." "You bought a bookstore?" Luna ran her fingers along the spines of classic novels lovingly displayed. "I wouldn't have pegged you for a book lover." "My mother was," he replied quietly. She dreamed of opening a shop like this. She died before she could. Understanding dawned on Luna. The photo on his desk. The wistful way he'd spoken of his mother that night at the gala. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. She would have loved it. Something in Camden's expression softened. "There's an apartment. Upstairs. Newly renovated. 3 bedrooms, modern kitchen, private rooftop garden." He paused. "I want you to live there." Luna blinked. "Excuse me?" "The bookstore opens next month. It needs a manager." He held up a hand as she began to protest. "Someone passionate about books. Good with people. The job comes with the apartment. Full benefits including complete medical coverage that would include your grandmother." "You investigated me," Luna accused, torn between outrage and incredulity. "Of course I did," Camden replied unapologetically. "You're carrying my child. And this is... what? Your way of controlling the situation? Keeping your pregnant waitress mistress hidden away in your quaint little bookstore project?" Camden's jaw tightened. "This is me offering you a good job and safe housing for our child. Your current apartment has black mold, Luna. Your neighborhood reported 14 violent crimes last month alone. You work double shifts on your feet all day, which Dr. Whitman specifically advised against. How dare you? And your grandmother's medication," he continued relentlessly, "costs $4,300 a month. Your insurance covers less than half. You've been paying the difference with credit cards that are now maxed out, which is why you've been skipping your own medication." Luna's face drained of color. "Have you been spying on me?" "I've been learning about the mother of my child," Camden corrected. "You're drowning, Luna. Let me help you." "In exchange for what?" she demanded. "What's the catch?" Camden ran a hand through his hair, a gesture that humanized him beyond any designer jeans could. "No catch. You get financial security and a safe home. I get to be involved in my child's life. The apartment has a separate entrance. Your life would be your own. Except I'd be living in your property, working in your business. Think of it as co-parenting with benefits," he suggested, a flicker of humor lightening his intensity. Despite herself, Luna laughed. "Has anyone ever told you that you're disturbingly controlling?" "Daily," he admitted, his lips quirking upward, usually followed by far less polite adjectives. Luna wandered through the bookstore, her mind racing. The practical part of her, the part that had struggled to keep her small family afloat since she was 18, recognized the lifeline being offered. Not just for her, but for her grandmother and the baby. "My brother," she said finally. "He's 17. He comes with us." "The apartment has 3 bedrooms," Camden reminded her. "I assumed as much. And I finished my nursing degree, no negotiation on that." "I wouldn't dream of it." Camden approached her, stopping a respectful distance away. "Is that a yes?" Luna studied him, the man the business world feared, offering her a bookstore because of a childhood dream his mother never realized. There were layers to Camden Blackwood that the world never saw, layers she'd glimpsed that night at the gala. "I'll think about it," she answered carefully. Camden nodded, accepting this non-answer with surprising grace. "The offer has no expiration date." As they left the bookstore, Camden's phone rang. His expression darkened as he checked the screen. "Blackwood," he answered, his voice instantly transforming into the cold tone she remembered from his office. "The Wellington. Deal was supposed to close today, Harrison." A pause. "Unacceptable. If their lawyers can't meet the deadline, replace them." Luna watched the transformation with fascination. This was the Camden Blackwood the world knew, the ruthless executioner who showed no mercy. When he hung up, his expression was troubled. "Is everything okay?" she asked. Camden hesitated. "The Wellington acquisition is complicated. The company is failing, but it employs over 2,000 people. If I dismantle it for assets, those jobs are gone. And if you don't? My investors Expect a 20% return. Keeping Wellington operational would cut that in half. Luna studied him. What would you do if money wasn't the point? Camden looked genuinely startled by the question, as if no one had ever asked him such a thing before. Their conversation was interrupted by the vibration of Luna's phone. Her face fell as she read the message. "What's wrong?" Camden asked, instantly alert. "My grandmother's caregiver quit. My brother can't miss any more school or he'll fail the semester." Luna's hands trembled slightly. "I need to get home." "Jones will take you," Camden said immediately. Then more hesitantly, "Would you like me to come? I could help figure something out." The offer was so unexpected that Luna nearly declined automatically, but something stopped her. Perhaps the genuine concern in his eyes, so at odds with the cold businessman of moments before. "Actually," she said, surprising herself, "that would be helpful." As the Bentley navigated back toward Queens, Luna found herself sneaking glances at the billionaire beside her, trying to reconcile the ruthless tycoon with the man who offered bookstores and seemed genuinely concerned about an old woman he'd never met. Camden caught her looking and raised an eyebrow. "Something on your mind?" Luna smiled wryly. "Just wondering which Camden Blackwood is going to meet my grandmother, the executioner or the bookstore dreamer." His response was unexpectedly vulnerable. "Let me know when you figure it out." Then, after a pause, "I'd like to know too." Carmen Morales had the kind of dignified beauty that age and illness couldn't diminish. Sitting in her worn armchair, by the window of the small Queens apartment, her hands trembling with Parkinson's, she possessed a regal quality that made Camden oddly nervous, a sensation he hadn't experienced in boardrooms with men controlling billions. "So you're the father," she said without preamble, her accent thickening her words but not dulling their impact. Camden, perched uncomfortably on a couch with a suspicious spring, nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Carmen's dark eyes, so like Luna's, assessed him with unnerving precision. "And you are here because—" "Abuela," Luna interrupted from the kitchenette where she was preparing tea. Camden offered to help find a new caregiver. "I don't need charity from strange men," Carmen declared firmly. Camden cleared his throat. "It's not charity, Mrs. Morales. I'm responsible for Luna's current condition. That makes me responsible for ensuring she can continue her education without worrying about your care." Carmen's expression softened marginally. "You speak like a businessman." "I am a businessman." "And what business do you have with my granddaughter, beyond this baby?" The directness of the question caught Camden off guard. What business indeed? The practical arrangement he'd proposed at the bookstore suddenly seemed hollow when faced with Carmen's penetrating gaze. Luna rescued him by returning with mugs of tea, followed by a lanky teenager with her same dark curls and suspicious eyes. "This is my brother Mateo," Luna introduced. "Mateo, this is Camden Blackwood." Mateo didn't offer his hand. "The billionaire baby daddy. Cool." "Mateo!" Luna scolded. Camden smiled, unexpectedly appreciating the boy's hostility more than fake politeness. "Nice to meet you, Mateo." "Whatever," the teen muttered. "I'm guessing you're not here to propose to my sister?" "Mateo, enough," Carmen interjected firmly. "Mr. Blackwood is a guest in our home." An awkward silence fell. Camden glanced around the apartment, small but immaculate, decorated with family photos and mementos. Despite its shabby furniture and peeling paint, it radiated more warmth than his own sterile penthouse ever had. "Luna tells me you enjoy reading, Mrs. Morales," Camden said, noticing the stack of well-worn books beside her chair. Carmen's face brightened. "Since I was a girl. My father was a literature professor in Puerto Rico before we came here. He taught me to love stories." "Abuela knows Garcia Marquez by heart," Luna said with affectionate pride. 100 Years of Solitude was my mother's favorite novel," Camden offered, surprising himself with the personal revelation. For the first time, Carmen smiled at him. "Your mother had excellent taste." The conversation flowed more easily after that, centered around books and stories. Carmen proved to be widely read and sharp-witted, while Mateo gradually abandoned his hostile stance to join the discussion when it turned to science fiction. Camden found himself relaxing, sharing stories of his mother's book collection that he rarely spoke about. The peaceful moment was interrupted by Camden's phone vibrating insistently. He checked it with a frown. "I need to take this," he apologized, stepping into the hallway. "Harrison, what now?" His CFO sounded frantic. "The Wellington deal is falling apart. Their CEO is threatening to sell to Prescott Ventures instead." "Prescott?" Camden's voice hardened. "Oliver doesn't have the capital. Apparently he's found investors. They're meeting in an hour at Le Bernardin to finalize." Camden checked his watch. "Stall them. I'll be there in 30 minutes." When he returned to the apartment, Luna was helping Carmen with her medication. "You're leaving," she said, not a question. "Business emergency. I'm sorry." Camden hesitated. "About your grandmother's caregiver?" "We'll manage," Luna interrupted, her expression closing off. Camden recognized the pride in her stance, the same stubborn self-reliance that had made her walk away that morning after the gala without leaving her number. "Luna, please, let me help." "Why?" she challenged. "Because of the baby? Or because you feel guilty?" "Because I care," he replied, the words escaping before he could consider their implications. Her eyes widened slightly. "My mother raised me alone while working 3 jobs," Camden continued quietly. "She refused help from anyone, even when she got sick. Her pride cost her years of her life, years I could have had with her if she'd just accepted the treatment she needed." Luna's expression softened. "Camden, I have a service that provides in-home medical care," he pressed on. "Professional caregivers, nurses, they could help until you've decided about the bookstore offer." From her armchair, Carmen observed their exchange with shrewd eyes. "Luna, show Mr. Blackwood out. He has important business to attend to." Camden approached the older woman, bowing slightly in a gesture of respect. "It was a pleasure meeting you, Mrs. Morales." "You'll come for dinner next week," she replied, somewhere between request and command. "Sunday, 7 o'clock. We'll discuss this caregiving arrangement then." Camden smiled. "I'd be honored." In the hallway outside, Luna leaned against the wall studying him. "You handled that well. Abuela doesn't usually warm to strangers so quickly." "She's remarkable," Camden said sincerely. "I see where you get your strength." Luna's cheeks colored slightly. "About the caregiving service?" "Just a phone call," Camden assured her. "No strings attached." Their eyes met, the tension of attraction still palpable between them despite the complications of their situation. "You should go," Luna said softly. "Your business emergency awaits." Camden hesitated, suddenly reluctant to return to the world of mergers and acquisitions when the warm little apartment with its threadbare furniture and strong coffee beckoned. "The Wellington deal," he explained. 2,000 jobs at stake." "And what will the executioner do with those jobs?" Luna asked, not unkindly. Camden's phone vibrated again. "I need to go." "Camden," Luna called as he started toward the elevator. When he turned, she offered a small smile. "Sunday, 7 o'clock. Don't be late." It felt strangely like a lifeline. Le Bernardin hummed with the quiet luxury that only old money could afford. Camden strode through the restaurant, nodding at familiar faces while his mind remained in a queen's apartment with peeling wallpaper. In a private dining room, Oliver Prescott sat across from Howard Wellington, the silver-haired CEO of Wellington Industries, and a trio of serious men in identical navy suits. "Camden," Oliver's false joviality didn't mask his disappointment at the interruption. "We were just discussing the future of Wellington Industries." "Were you?" Camden took the empty seat at the head of the table. "Howard, I thought we had an agreement." Wellington looked uncomfortable. "Your terms were difficult, Camden. Prescott Ventures is offering to maintain our operations." "At a loss?" Camden raised an eyebrow. How philanthropic of Oliver. Oliver's smile tightened. Unlike you, Blackwood, some of us consider more than just the bottom line. The irony of Oliver Prescott, who had tormented him mercilessly for being poor, posing as a champion of working people, wasn't lost on Camden. Neither was the calculation behind it. Oliver wanted Wellington Industries for its valuable patents, not its workforce. The preservation of jobs was a temporary ploy to secure the deal. Camden studied Oliver, seeing not the successful businessman but the spoiled boy who had mocked his shoes. For 15 years, Camden had built his empire with revenge as the foundation, buying companies from beneath former classmates, destroying the businesses of those who had once looked down on him. Oliver Prescott represented the final conquest in that crusade. But as Camden prepared to deliver the crushing counteroffer that would secure Wellington Industries and devastate Oliver financially, Luna's question echoed in his mind. What would you do if money wasn't the point? Camden thought of Carmen Morales, dignified despite her illness, of Mateo, protective of his sister despite his youth, of Luna, working double shifts while pursuing her degree, never complaining about the unfairness of her struggles. And for the first time in his ruthless ascent to power, Camden Blackwood questioned what he was truly fighting for. Gentlemen, he said finally, I'd like to propose an alternative. For the next hour, Camden outlined a restructuring plan that would preserve Wellington Industries as an operational subsidiary of Blackwood Enterprises, maintaining all current employment while gradually transitioning to sustainable profitability. This is highly irregular, his CFO sputtered when Camden finished. It's insane, Oliver added bluntly. You'll take a 30% hit on projected returns. 32%, Camden corrected calmly. But Wellington's sustainable energy patents align with my company's 5-year diversification strategy. Howard Wellington's eyes shone with undisguised relief. You'd keep the company intact? No layoffs? No layoffs, Camden confirmed. In fact, I'd like to expand the research division. As the meeting adjourned with handshakes and sighs of relief, Oliver cornered Camden by the coat check. What game are you playing, Blackwood? This isn't like you. Camden adjusted his scarf. Perhaps you don't know me as well as you think, Oliver. This is about that waitress, isn't it? Oliver sneered. The one who came to your office. Word gets around, you know. Camden Blackwood's little queen's conquest. Camden's hand shot out, gripping Oliver's silk tie with sudden, dangerous intensity. Careful, he warned, voice soft but lethal. Oliver paled. Hit a nerve, did I? Camden released him, straightening his tie with deliberate precision. You know, Oliver, I've spent 15 years building an empire with one purpose, proving that the poor scholarship kid with taped-up shoes could own you and everyone like you. He smiled coldly. And I've succeeded. So thoroughly that I no longer need to care what you think. Oliver's eyes widened at the reference to their childhood encounter. You remember that? I remember everything, Camden replied. Every taunt, every humiliation. I built Blackwood Enterprises on the foundation of those memories. That's disturbing, Oliver managed. Camden laughed, genuinely amused for the first time in their encounter. Perhaps, but I'm beginning to think there might be better foundations for the next phase of my life. As he walked away, Camden felt oddly lighter, as if setting down a burden he'd carried since childhood. His phone chimed with a text message from Luna. Abuela insists you bring dessert on Sunday. Something chocolate. Peace. The caregiving service called. Thank you. Camden smiled, sliding into the back seat of his waiting Bentley. Jones, we need to make a stop at that chocolatier on Madison. Very good, sir, his driver replied, catching Camden's unusually relaxed expression in the rearview mirror. May I ask the occasion? Camden gazed out at the city, thinking of the strange new path unfolding before him. Family dinner? He said, testing how the words felt on his tongue. They felt surprisingly right. 3 months had transformed Camden Blackwood's life in ways no business acquisition ever had. Sunday family dinners at the Morales apartment had become the highlight of his week. He'd learned to play dominoes with Carmen, who showed no mercy despite her trembling hands. He'd introduced Matteo to coding, discovering the boy's natural aptitude for technology, and he'd fallen more deeply for Luna with each passing day, though neither had put words to the feelings growing between them. Today, Camden paced the rooftop garden of the brownstone bookstore, making last-minute adjustments to the small table set for two, with the Manhattan skyline glittering beyond. After weeks of Carmen's not-so-subtle matchmaking and Matteo's eye-rolling commentary on their obvious attraction, Camden had finally asked Luna to dinner, just the two of them. "You're nervous," observed Jones, who had arrived with the catered meal from Luna's favorite restaurant. Camden straightened silverware that was already perfectly aligned. "That's ridiculous. I negotiate billion-dollar deals without breaking a sweat." "Yes, sir," Jones replied, his usually stoic expression softening with something like amusement. "The flowers are excessive." Camden surveyed the dozens of arrangements transforming the rooftop into a fragrant garden. "Too much?" "For anyone else, yes." Jones adjusted his tie. "For Ms. Morales, perhaps appropriate." The loyalty in Jones's voice wasn't lost on Camden. Over the past months, his normally reserved driver had become almost protective of Luna and her family, volunteering to drive Carmen to medical appointments and teaching Matteo to parallel park in the Bentley, something Camden himself hadn't known about until he'd received the parking ticket. His staff had been transformed by the Morales family's introduction into his life. His cold, efficient household had somehow warmed, as if Luna had brought sunshine into rooms that had never known natural light. The bookstore below was now open, managed by Luna 3 days a week while she continued her nursing studies. Camden often found himself inventing reasons to visit, watching her recommend novels to customers, or read to children during the weekend story hour, her pregnancy now visible in the gentle curve beneath her flowing dresses. Luna had agreed to the apartment above the store only after establishing strict boundaries. She paid rent, an amount Camden considered symbolic, but she insisted was fair market value. She maintained her independence, and the arrangement was temporary until she finished her degree. They were co-parents preparing for a child, she maintained. Nothing more. But something had shifted in recent weeks. Lingering glances, conversations that stretched late into the night, the electricity of accidental touches. Camden found himself sharing thoughts he'd never vocalized, while Luna gradually revealed the dreams she'd set aside to care for her family. The sound of the rooftop door opening pulled Camden from his thoughts. Luna appeared, wearing a simple, blue dress that made her eyes seem even darker. At 5 months pregnant, she glowed with a vitality that took his breath away. "This is... wow," she said, taking in the transformed space. Camden pulled out her chair. "Too much?" Luna laughed. "Definitely, but somehow perfect." As they ate, conversation flowed easily between them. Discussions of the bookstore's success, Luna's nursing program, Carmen's improving health under the care of the medical team Camden had arranged. They carefully avoided the topic of what happened after the baby arrived, maintaining the fiction that their arrangement was purely practical. "The Wellington restructuring is going well," Camden offered as they finished dessert. "The renewable energy division is already showing promise." Luna studied him over her sparkling water. "You never told me why you changed your mind about that deal." Camden hesitated. How could he explain that a simple question from her had unraveled 15 years of single-minded ambition? That meeting her family had made him question what true success looked like. "I realized I was building an empire for the wrong reasons," he said finally. "Revenge is a hollow foundation. And what are the right reasons? I'm still figuring that out." His eyes met hers. "But I think it has something to do with creating something meaningful, something that lasts." Luna's hand rested protectively over her stomach. "Like a family?" The word hung between them, charged with possibilities neither had acknowledged. "Luna, The shrill ring of his phone interrupted the moment. Camden checked the screen with a frown. "I need to take this, it's the Tokyo office." Luna nodded, rising from the table. "I'll give you privacy." While Camden handled the call, a minor crisis that his Tokyo team could have resolved without him, Luna wandered to the edge of the rooftop garden. The city spread before her, a tapestry of lights against the darkening sky. Somewhere in that glittering landscape was her old apartment, where she'd spent countless nights worrying about bills and Carmen's health. Now she stood on a rooftop garden, carrying the child of one of New York's wealthiest men, with her grandmother receiving the best medical care available and her brother applying to top universities with Camden's encouragement. It felt like a fairy tale, and that was precisely what worried her. Camden joined her at the railing. "Sorry about that." "It's who you are," Luna replied. "Camden Blackwood, the business titan." "Is that all you think I am?" he asked quietly. Luna turned to face him. "I don't know what to think, Camden. 3 months ago, you were a one-night stand who turned out to be a billionaire. Now you're..." She gestured helplessly. "I'm what?" "That's just it. I don't know." Luna's voice trembled slightly. "You've created this perfect bubble for us. The bookstore, the apartment, the medical care for Abuela. But bubbles burst, Camden. They always do." "This isn't a bubble," he insisted. "Isn't it? You live in a world of corporate takeovers and private jets. I'm a nursing student from Queens. This arrangement works now, but what happens when the novelty wears off? When the baby comes and reality sets in?" "Is that what you think this is? A novelty?" Luna shrugged, fighting tears. "What else could it be? Men like you don't end up with women like me except in fairy tales." Camden studied her face in the glow of the string lights, seeing the vulnerability beneath her fierce independence. "My mother used to read me fairy tales," he said softly. "But she always changed the endings." Luna raised an eyebrow. "How?" "She said the prince didn't matter, that Cinderella would have been fine on her own, that she was always worthy with or without the glass slipper or the castle." Camden moved closer. "My mother believed the real magic wasn't in fairy godmothers or enchanted pumpkins, but in recognizing your own worth." "Sounds like a wise woman." "She was." Camden took a deep breath. "She also said that if I ever found someone who made me want to be better than I was, I should never let them go." Luna's eyes widened. "Camden." "I'm not good at this," he interrupted. "Relationships, feelings. I've spent my adult life building walls no one could breach. Then you walked into my office and announced you were pregnant, and suddenly those walls seemed pointless." "I didn't ask for this," Luna whispered. "For you to change your life. You didn't have to ask. You just had to exist." Camden took her hands. "Luna Morales, you stormed into my carefully controlled world and turned it upside down. You made me question everything I thought I wanted. You and your grandmother and your brother showed me what I've been missing while I've been accumulating. Wealth and power. And what's that?" "A family," Camden said simply. "A real one. Not built on obligation or practicality, but on..." "On what?" Luna prompted, her heart pounding. "On love," he finished, the word foreign, yet right on his tongue. "I'm in love with you, Luna. Not because of the baby, although I already love our child too. I'm in love with the woman who stood up for a co-worker at the risk of her own job, who works double shifts to support her family, who refuses to accept charity but offers kindness freely to everyone she meets." Luna blinked rapidly, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "You can't just say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I might believe you," she exclaimed. "And then what happens when you realize that caring for a baby means sleepless nights and messy diaper changes? When you get tired of explaining to your society friends why you're with someone who was once your server?" Camden smiled. "You think so little of me?" "I think so naturally of what happens in the real world," Luna corrected, "where different worlds rarely mix successfully." Camden reached into his pocket, withdrawing a small velvet box. Luna gasped. "What are you doing?" "Something I should have done months ago." He opened the box, revealing not a ring but a key. "This isn't a marriage proposal, not yet. We have time for that if and when you're ready." "Then what is it?" A key to my home. My real home, not this apartment I set up for you. Camden held it out. I want us to create a home together, Luna. Somewhere that's ours, not mine or yours. Somewhere we choose together that reflects both of us. Luna stared at the key. You want us to live together? I want us to be a family, Camden clarified. You, me, our baby, and Carmen and Mateo too if they want. Or they can stay in the apartment here if they prefer independence. You've thought this through, Luna observed, a smile tugging at her lips. I plan hostile takeovers for a living, Camden reminded her with a grin, though this is the first time I've planned one with my heart instead of my head. Luna laughed, the sound like music in the night air. Your corporate board will have a fit. The executioner domesticated by a waitress from Queens. Former waitress, Camden corrected, pulling her closer. Current bookstore manager, future nurse, and hopefully... He hesitated. My future wife. Someday. When you're ready. Luna's breath caught. Is that part of your corporate strategy too? No, Camden murmured, his lips inches from hers. That's purely selfish. I love you, Luna Morales. You've taught me what actually matters in this world, and it isn't stock options or corporate mergers. What matters then? She whispered. This, he replied, kissing her with all the tenderness she'd awakened in him. Us. Family. Love. When they finally parted, Luna studied him with glistening eyes. You know, for a ruthless billionaire, you can be surprisingly romantic. Only with you. Camden placed a gentle hand on her rounded stomach. And maybe with this little one. As if in response, the baby kicked against his palm. Luna laughed at his expression of wonder. I think that's a yes, she said softly, taking the key from the box. To the home, to the family, to us. And the someday proposal? Camden asked, heart racing with an emotion no business victory had ever evoked. Luna smiled, winding her arms around his neck. Ask me again in a year, Mr. Blackwood. When we've weathered midnight feedings and diaper explosions. When you've seen me at my worst and I've seen you at yours. If you still want to marry a headstrong woman from Queens, then I will, he promised, sealing the vow with another kiss. Every day of our lives I will. 1 year later, the grand opening of the Carmen Morales Memorial Hospital wing drew crowds of reporters and benefactors. Camden stood at the podium, unusually nervous as he prepared to address the gathered press. The Blackwood Foundation's largest project to date is dedicated to providing accessible healthcare to underserved communities, he began. Named in honor of Carmen Morales, whose strength in the face of illness inspired its creation. In the Idora front row, Luna sat with their 6-month-old daughter, Elisa Carmen Blackwood, who babbled happily in her mother's arms. Beside them, Mateo, now a freshman at Columbia, recorded the speech on his phone. Carmen hadn't lived to see her great-granddaughter's birth, but her spirit infused the family Camden had once never dared to dream of having. 3 years ago, Camden continued, I measured success by acquisitions and profit margins. Today, I measure it differently. His eyes found Luna's. Today, success is about the lives we touch, the communities we serve, and the love we share. The press conference concluded with the announcement of the Blackwood Foundation's next initiative, a scholarship program for nursing students from low-income backgrounds, inspired by Luna's recently completed degree. As the crowd dispersed, Camden joined his family, taking his daughter into his arms. She immediately grabbed his tie, a habit that never failed to melt the heart of the man once known as the executioner. Ready for our next adventure, Mrs. Blackwood? He asked, pressing a kiss to Luna's forehead. The simple gold band on her finger caught the light as she smiled up at him. Always, Mr. Blackwood. Behind them, the hospital wing's entrance featured a plaque with Carmen's favorite quote from Garcia Marquez. It's enough for me to be sure that you and I exist at this moment. And for the family that had found each other against all odds, the billionaire with a painful past and the waitress who had healed his heart, existing together in this moment, and all the moments to come, was more than enough. It was everything.
You're about to witness a tale of love, betrayal, and a shocking secret that will change everything. Don't forget to hit that like button to show your support and subscribe so you don't miss a single word. The grand ballroom of the Malmaison estate glittered under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Every detail was meticulously arranged for what was heralded as the wedding of the year. Alexander Sterling, the 38-year-old CEO of the tech behemoth Sterling Innovations and one of Britain's wealthiest men, adjusted his Italian silk tie, his gaze sweeping over the final preparations. He had everything a man could possibly desire: a fortune in the billions, an unblemished reputation, and in a few short hours, he was to marry Celestine Vance, the elegant heiress of a prominent Parisian family. Yet, an unshakable anxiety gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't push away no matter how hard he tried to project an air of calm. "Mr. Sterling, the first guests are beginning to arrive." His personal assistant, Philip, a man in his 50s, who had been with him for over a decade, announced discreetly. Alexander nodded, his gray eyes scanning the guest list one last time. 350 carefully selected people. Ministers, ambassadors, captains of industry, and a host of celebrities. They had all come to celebrate his union, but there was only one name on that list that truly mattered to him, and it was her presence that filled him with the most dread. Emily Davies, his first love, his first passion. The woman he had shared 5 intense years with before a tragic misunderstanding tore them apart forever. It had been 8 years since he'd last seen her. 8 long years, during which he built his empire, while trying to forget the scent of her chestnut hair and the sound of her crystalline laugh. Why on earth had he had the insane idea to invite her to his wedding? Perhaps to prove to himself that he had moved on for good. Or maybe out of sheer masochism. He wasn't entirely sure anymore. What do you think was the real reason behind Alexander's impulsive decision to invite his ex to his wedding? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The hours passed slowly, marked by the effusive congratulations of the guests and the practiced social smiles Alexander handed out with ease. Celestine was radiant in a custom-made wedding dress, her blonde hair perfectly swept up in an intricate chignon, her family jewels gleaming in the lights. She was the epitome of French elegance, the exact kind of woman a man of his stature was meant to marry. Still, Alexander couldn't help but steal glances toward the entrance, searching for a silhouette he would recognize among thousands. "You seem distracted, darling," Celestine whispered, her arm slipping under his. Her perfect smile didn't waver, but he heard the hint of worry in her voice. "Is everything all right?" Alexander forced a smile back, gently stroking her powdered cheek. "Everything is perfectly fine, my love. Just the emotion of the moment." But deep down, he knew he was lying. Nothing was fine, and the suffocating feeling in his chest only grew more intense with each passing minute. The civil ceremony in the estate's gardens unfolded without a hitch under a clear April sky. A close family friend and politician gave a moving speech about love and commitment. Alexander answered, "I do," in a steady voice, but his eyes continued to discreetly scan the crowd. Emily still wasn't there. Perhaps she had decided not to come after all, which was probably for the best. And yet, a part of him couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. Applause erupted as the official declared them husband and wife, and Alexander kissed Celestine with all the tenderness he could muster. The photographers captured the moment, which would undoubtedly be labeled the kiss of the year by gossip magazines. But his mind was elsewhere, haunted by a single question. Was this how a man was supposed to feel on his wedding day? This sense of emptiness, as if he were an actor in a play whose script he didn't control? The cocktail reception had been in full swing for about an hour when Philip approached Alexander with his usual air of concern. "Sir, we have a delicate situation at the entrance. A Miss Davies has just arrived, but—" He hesitated, which was uncharacteristic for the normally direct man. "But what, Philip? She hasn't come alone, sir. She's accompanied by a little girl who appears to be around 7 years old." Alexander felt his blood run cold. 7 years old. Exactly the age a child would be if conceived on their last night together. That night of passion and tears that preceded their final breakup. "Let them in," he said, his voice more strained than he intended. "And Philip, not a word of this to anyone for now." His assistant nodded and quickly moved away, leaving Alexander alone with his thoughts, which raced like stampeding horses. A 7-year-old girl. It had to be a coincidence, right? Emily would have told him if she had a child. No, she had never spoken to him again after that fateful night. He had tried to contact her for months, but she had changed her number, moved away, and vanished from his life as if she had never existed. The minutes that followed felt like an eternity. Alexander continued to smile and shake hands, but his mind was elsewhere, fixated on this revelation that threatened to shatter his world. Celestine, thankfully, was preoccupied with friends who were gushing over her dress and jewels, giving him a moment to compose himself. He sipped his champagne, trying to appear relaxed, but his hands trembled slightly, and he had the unnerving feeling that every guest could read his thoughts on his face. That's when he saw her. Emily appeared on the terrace, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. She was even more beautiful than he remembered, her chestnut hair falling freely over her shoulders, her simple but elegant dress highlighting her graceful silhouette. But what truly took his breath away was the little girl holding her hand. A little girl with light brown hair and gray eyes so strikingly similar to his own that he couldn't deny the truth that now hit him like a hammer. The child was his spitting image at that age, the same fine features, the same intense gaze, the same way of tilting her head slightly when something intrigued her. Alexander felt his legs go weak and had to discreetly lean against a column to steady himself. How was it possible? How could Emily have hidden the existence of their daughter from him for all these years? Emily's gaze swept across the gathering until her eyes met his, and in that instant, that felt like an eternity. 8 years of silence and unspoken words hung between them, like a heavy shroud. She was pale, visibly as shaken as he was, but there was a determination in her eyes that he didn't recognize. The little girl, meanwhile, was looking around with curiosity, impressed by the opulence of the estate and the elegance of the guests. "Mommy, is this where my daddy is really getting married?" the child asked, in a clear voice that reached Alexander's ears despite the background noise. Emily leaned down and whispered something to her, but Alexander had heard what he needed to hear. "Daddy." The little girl was talking about him as her father, which meant Emily had told her the truth about her origins. But then why had she come today? What did she want from him after all these years of silence? He needed to go talk to her, to understand what was happening, but his feet felt nailed to the floor. How could he explain to Celestine, on their wedding day, that he might have a 7-year-old daughter with his ex-fiancée? How could he justify the fact that he had invited that same ex-fiancée to his wedding without telling her? He was caught in a trap of his own making, and the consequences of his actions suddenly loomed over him with brutal clarity. "Alexander, who is that woman looking at you like that?" Celestine's voice snapped him back to reality. His new wife was by his side, her sharp gaze fixed on Emily and the little girl. There was a hint of jealousy in her voice that she tried to mask with social politeness, but Alexander knew her well enough to detect the signs of her brewing displeasure. "An old acquaintance," he answered evasively, striving to keep his tone neutral. I didn't think she would come. Celestine raised a perfectly shaped eyebrow. Her feminine intuition told her that this old acquaintance was far more than Alexander was willing to admit. And the little girl, she bears a striking resemblance to you, don't you think? Alexander felt a bead of sweat form on his brow. His wife was far from naive, and he knew he wouldn't be able to hide the truth for long. Before he could respond, Emily approached them, still holding her daughter's hand. Each of her steps echoed in Alexander's mind, like the clang of a gong, announcing the inevitable confrontation he so feared. Guests around them began to notice the palpable tension, and conversations hushed, glances becoming more curious. "Hello, Alexander," Emily said, her voice steady as she reached them. "Congratulations on your wedding." Her tone was polite but distant, the kind one uses with a perfect stranger. Only the slight tremor in her voice betrayed her emotion. Alexander opened his mouth to reply, but no sound came out. He was mesmerized by this woman he had once loved more than anything in the world, and who now stood before him with his daughter, suddenly turning his entire existence upside down. "Hello," he finally managed. "I'm glad you could make it." It was a lie. He wasn't glad. He was terrified, confused, overwhelmed by a mix of emotions he couldn't untangle. Celestine moved closer, her arms sliding possessively around his, marking her territory with the subtlety of a lioness protecting her cub. "I don't believe we've been introduced," she said, extending a perfectly manicured hand toward Emily. "I'm Celestine Sterling, Alexander's wife." The emphasis she placed on the word wife left no doubt about her intentions. Emily politely shook the extended hand, her smile not wavering for a second. "Emily Davies, it's a pleasure to meet you. Mrs. Sterling, allow me to introduce my daughter, Chloe." The little girl curtsied perfectly, as she had no doubt been taught, and gave Celestine a radiant smile. "Hello, ma'am. Mommy said you were very pretty, and it's true." The child's innocence stood in cruel contrast to the electric tension between the adults. Celestine couldn't help but smile, touched by the child's spontaneity, but Alexander saw that her eyes remained wary. "How old are you, Chloe?" Celestine asked with forced sweetness. "I'm 7.5, ma'am. I'll be 8 in December." Alexander closed his eyes for a second. December. Exactly 9 months after that last night they had spent together. That last night of love before they parted for good. The math was relentless, and there was no longer any possible doubt about the little girl's paternity. The silence that followed was deafening. Celestine, who was no fool, was visibly starting to put the pieces of the puzzle together. Her gaze darted from Alexander to Emily, then from Emily to Chloe, and he could almost see the gears in her mind turning at top speed. When she finally looked back at her husband, there was a cold glint in her eyes that he had never seen before. "Alexander, could you give me a moment alone?" she asked in a dangerously calm voice. It wasn't really a question, but a thinly veiled command, and they both knew it. Alexander nodded, unable to refuse, even though he knew this conversation would likely be one of the most difficult of his life. "Emily, if you'll excuse us for a few minutes," he said, turning to his ex-fiancée. "Perhaps we can talk later?" Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the delicate situation she had put them in with her mere presence. "Of course. Chloe and I will go look at the gardens in the meantime. They're magnificent." She took her daughter's hand and walked away gracefully, leaving behind a trail of perfume that instantly transported Alexander back 8 years. Celestine waited until they were out of earshot before turning to her husband, her mask of social grace dropping instantly. "Don't tell me you didn't know," she hissed through gritted teeth, her blue eyes flashing. "That child is your spitting image, Alexander. How could you hide something like this from me on our wedding day?" Her voice was low but vibrant with anger, and Alexander realized he had never seen his wife in such a state. "I genuinely didn't know, Celestine," he replied, his voice muffled. I swear I didn't know. If I had known Emily was pregnant. He trailed off, unable to say what he would have done in that case. Would he have married Emily? Would he have given up Celestine? These questions tortured him, but it was too late to answer them now. Why did you invite her? Celestine asked, her voice cracking slightly. Why did you invite your ex-fiancé to our wedding without even telling me? Was it your intention to humiliate me in front of all of London society? Tears welled in her eyes, and Alexander's heart sank. Whatever the complexity of his feelings, Celestine didn't deserve this. She was a good woman, generous and caring, and she didn't deserve to suffer for his past mistakes. It wasn't my intention, he said, trying to take her hands in his, but she pulled away abruptly. I just wanted to. I don't know what I wanted, Celestine. Maybe to prove to myself that I had moved on. Maybe to have a conversation with her to finally close that chapter of my life. I had no idea she would come with your daughter? Celestine finished bitterly. Your daughter, whose existence you were unaware of until today. How is that possible, Alexander? How can a woman hide a child from a man for 7 years? Her question was a fair one, and Alexander had been asking himself the same thing since he first saw Chloe. Why hadn't Emily said anything? What had driven her to raise their daughter alone for all these years? I don't know, he admitted, but I fully intend to find out. Celestine, I know this is terrible for you, for us, but I can't act as if this child doesn't exist now that I know she's here. She's my daughter. The words burst out before he could stop them, and he immediately saw the effect they had on his wife. She paled, swayed slightly, and had to lean against the castle wall to keep from falling. Your daughter, she repeated, as if the words were poison in her mouth. We've been married for 3 hours, Alexander, and you're already telling me you have a daughter with another woman. How do you expect me to react? How do you expect us to build our future together with this secret between us? Her voice was now thick with sobs that she was desperately trying to suppress, aware that all the guests could be watching them. Alexander wanted to hug her, to reassure her, to promise her that nothing would change between them. But he knew it would be a lie. Everything had changed the moment he laid eyes on Chloe. That child was his flesh and blood, and he could never act as if she didn't exist. At the same time, he loved Celestine, or at least he believed he loved her, and he didn't want their marriage to end before it had even begun. We'll find a solution, he finally said, though he had no idea what that solution could be. Let me talk to Emily, understand why she did this, and then we'll see how to handle the situation. Celestine stared at him, her eyes scrutinizing his face as if she were trying to read their future. All right, she finally said. But know this, Alexander. I will not share my husband with the ghost of his past. Whether that woman has your daughter or not, you will have to make a choice. It's her, or me. But not both. With those words, she turned and walked back to the guests, instantly putting her mask of a radiant newlywed back in place. Alexander watched her go, wondering if he had just lost his wife on their wedding day. He stood alone for a few minutes, trying to collect himself and decide on his next move. Around him, the party was in full swing. Guests laughed, drank champagne, and danced to the orchestra he had specially flown in from London. No one seemed to have noticed the drama that had just unfolded, or at least they were pretending not to save appearances. In the world Alexander moved in, scandals had to be kept secret, emotions contained, and facades maintained at all costs. He finally headed toward the gardens, his heart pounding faster with every step that brought him closer to Emily and Chloe. He found them by the lily pond, the little girl happily counting the goldfish while her mother gazed thoughtfully at the water shimmering in the evening sun. Emily didn't turn around as he approached, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly, betraying that she was aware of his presence. "Hello, Daddy," Chloe exclaimed happily when she saw him, and those two simple words hit Alexander's heart like a bomb. "Daddy!" His own daughter was calling him Daddy, even though they had just met for the first time. How was that possible? What exactly had Emily told her about him? "Hello, Chloe," he replied softly, crouching down to her level. Up close, the resemblance was even more astonishing. This child was a perfect blend of him and Emily, with her brown hair that had auburn highlights, her gray eyes with flecks of green, and her mischievous smile that reminded him so much of his own childhood. "You look very pretty in your blue dress." Chloe beamed at the compliment and twirled her dress coquettishly. "Mommy bought it for me specially to come see you. She said it was a very important day, and I had to look beautiful." Alexander glanced at Emily, who had finally deigned to turn toward them. Her face was impassive, but there was a depth of emotion in her green eyes that he couldn't decipher. "Chloe, would you like to go see the swans in the pond?" Emily asked gently. "Just don't get too close to the edge, okay?" The little girl nodded enthusiastically and skipped away, leaving her parents face to face for the first time in 8 years. The silence that settled between them was heavy, with so many unspoken things, with hushed reproaches and unanswered questions, that Alexander didn't know where or why to begin. He finally managed to utter one simple word that summed up all his queries. "Why? Why didn't you tell me anything? Why did you raise our daughter alone? Why come today, on my wedding day?" Emily understood the meaning of his question perfectly, and her face hardened slightly. "Because you made it very clear that you never wanted to see me again," she replied in a calm but reproachful voice. "Because you accused me of terrible things that night, Alexander. Because you refused to listen to me when I tried to tell you the truth. So when I found out I was pregnant, I preferred to raise our daughter far away from you, rather than risk her suffering your disdain." Alexander felt a dagger twist in his chest. That night, 8 years ago, came back to haunt him with painful precision. They had argued because of a photo in a gossip magazine, a photo showing Emily in the arms of another man at a charity gala. Alexander, blinded by jealousy and pride, had refused to listen to her explanations, convinced she was cheating on him. They had made love one last time in a mix of passion and desperation. Then, she had left the next morning without a word, taking all their hopes of happiness with her. "You should have told me about Chloe," he insisted. "Whatever our differences, I had a right to know I had a daughter." Emily let out a bitter laugh that broke his heart. "Oh yes. And what would you have done, Alexander? Would you have married me out of obligation? Would you have given up your precious career, your ambitions, your lifestyle to be a father with a woman you accused of infidelity? No, I don't think so. I preferred to let you live your life and build my own with our daughter." "And what did you tell her about me?" he asked, looking at Chloe, who was now happily feeding the ducks with some breadcrumbs she had found. "She called me Daddy, as if she'd known me her whole life." Emily's gaze followed his, and her expression softened as she watched their daughter. "I told her the truth, Alexander, that her daddy was a very important, very busy man who couldn't live with us, but that he loved her very much. I showed her your pictures in the papers. I told her about your business successes. I never wanted her to hate you or to think you had willingly abandoned her." This revelation shocked Alexander more than he expected. Despite their painful breakup, Emily had preserved his image in their daughter's eyes. She had allowed her to grow up loving a father she had never known. "Then why now?" he asked. "Why come today on my wedding day? What do you want from me, Emily?" There was a plea in his voice that he didn't even try to hide. He needed to understand, to make sense of this situation that was turning everything he thought he knew about his life upside down. Emily took a deep breath before answering, as if she were gathering the courage to say something difficult. "Because Chloe is sick, Alexander. She needs a bone marrow transplant, and I'm not a match." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Alexander saw tears well up in her green eyes. The doctors say her chances of finding a compatible donor increase significantly if a close relative can be tested. You are her last hope, Alexander. The world crumbled around him. His daughter, this magnificent child he had just discovered, was sick, potentially dying. And Emily had come to see him not to turn his life upside down or to take revenge for old wounds, but to save their daughter. Suddenly, everything made a different kind of sense. Her presence at the wedding, her determination, despite the awkward situation. The courage she had to muster to come and ask for his help. What illness? He managed to articulate, his voice a whisper. Leukemia, Emily replied, discreetly wiping her eyes. Diagnosed 6 months ago. She has responded well to chemotherapy, but the doctors say a transplant is necessary to ensure a complete cure. I've exhausted all the donor banks in the UK and Europe. You're her last hope, Alexander. Alexander felt his legs give way and had to sit on the stone bench by the pond. His daughter was sick, seriously ill, and he hadn't even known. While he was building his financial empire and planning his dream wedding, his daughter was fighting cancer. Guilt washed over him like a wave, mixed with a terror he had never felt before. He was a man used to controlling every aspect of his life, but here, faced with this revelation, he felt utterly helpless. How long have you known? He asked. His voice hoarse. Emily sat beside him, keeping a respectful distance, but close enough that he could smell the familiar scent of her skin. The diagnosis was last October. At first I hoped a compatible donor would turn up, but as the months went by, she shrugged with a resignation that broke his heart. The doctors insisted I contact the biological father. I resisted as long as I could, Alexander, but I can't let our daughter die because of pride. The word die echoed in Alexander's mind like a funeral bell. He looked at Chloe, who was laughing as a swan approached the edge of the pond, so full of life and carefree that it was impossible to imagine she was ill. She doesn't know how serious it is, does she? Emily shook her head. I told her she was a little sick and had to take medicine to get better, but she doesn't know all the details. She's suffered enough with the chemotherapy already. I'll get tested, Alexander said, without a second's hesitation. Tomorrow morning. No, tonight if I have to. What do I do? Who do I contact? For the first time since she had arrived, Emily smiled. A genuine smile that lit up her face and reminded Alexander why he had fallen in love with her all those years ago. Thank you, she whispered. I knew that despite everything that happened between us, you couldn't refuse to help Chloe. She's my daughter, he replied simply, and those 3 words held all the determination in the world. Even if I just met her, she's my daughter, and I will do everything in my power to save her. He turned to Emily, their gazes meeting for the first time since they had started talking. Why did you wait until today? You could have come to me earlier, explained the situation. Emily looked away, ashamed. I tried to contact you several times. I called your office, but your assistant always said you were in a meeting or traveling. I wrote letters that I never sent, and then I saw the announcement of your wedding in the papers, and I thought that if you invited me, maybe it would be a sign that you were willing to listen to me. She let out a small, nervous laugh. I never expected you to actually do it. Me neither, Alexander admitted. I don't even know why I did. Maybe to prove to myself that I had moved on. Or maybe— He didn't finish his sentence, unable to confess that maybe, deep down, he had hoped to see her again. In any case, I'm glad you came, even if the circumstances are— He searched for the words. Complicated. Chloe came running back to them, her cheeks flushed from the cool evening air. Mommy, Daddy, did you see the swans? They're magnificent. And there are little babies, too. The child's enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the seriousness of the situation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. This child was a ray of sunshine, and the thought that she might be in danger filled him with a fierce protectiveness. "Yes, darling, we saw them," Emily replied, stroking her daughter's hair. "Chloe, would you like to spend some time with Daddy? Maybe the two of you could get to know each other." Chloe nodded vigorously, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Oh, yes. Can you tell me about your job, Daddy? Mommy says you build very important things." Alexander's heart ached. This child was looking at him with such unconditional love and admiration that it moved him to his core. How could he have missed all this? How could he have lived 7 years without knowing about the existence of this wonderful little being, his own flesh and blood? "Of course, little one," he replied, kneeling down in front of her. "But first, you tell me what you like to do. What are your favorite games? What's your favorite color?" Chloe launched into an enthusiastic chatter, telling him she loved to draw, that she took piano lessons, that she loved princess stories, but also pirate adventures, and that her favorite color was violet, like her doll's eyes. As he listened to his daughter, Alexander felt a presence behind him. He turned and saw Philip approaching with his usual grave expression. "Sir, I apologize for the interruption, but Mrs. Sterling is looking for you. The guests are beginning to wonder about your absence." The brutal return to reality hit Alexander like a slap. His wedding, Celestine, his guests, his new life waiting for him at the estate. How was he going to reconcile all this with this discovery that changed everything? "I'll be there in a few minutes, Philip," he replied. His assistant nodded and walked away discreetly. But Alexander saw that he had noticed the striking resemblance between himself and Chloe. Philip was an intelligent and discreet man who had managed many delicate situations for his boss over the years, but this one surpassed anything they had ever encountered. "I have to get back to my guests," he said to Emily as he stood up. "But we need to talk, really talk, about Chloe, about her treatment, about what we're going to do now." Emily nodded, perfectly understanding the impossible situation he was in. "Of course, we can leave now if you prefer. I didn't want to disrupt your evening more than necessary." "No," Alexander said, more firmly than he had intended. "No, don't leave. Not yet. Chloe, would you like to see the inside of the estate? There are very beautiful paintings, and even a library with old books." The little girl's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, are there history books?" "Lots," Alexander promised. "Philip will give you a tour while I tend to my guests, and then we'll all have dinner together. Does that sound good to you?" Emily seemed to hesitate. "Alexander, I'm not sure that's a good idea. Your wife didn't seem very happy to see us, and I can understand that. After all, it's her wedding day." But Alexander had made up his mind. He had just discovered he had a daughter, that she was sick, and he wasn't going to let her leave without having some time to get to know her better. "Celestine will understand," he said, hoping it was true. "Philip, could you have 2 extra place settings prepared for dinner and show Miss Chloe the estate? She loves stories." His assistant nodded without asking questions, long accustomed to his boss's unexpected requests. "Of course, sir. Miss Chloe, if you'll follow me." Chloe confidently took Philip's extended hand. Then she turned back to Alexander. "Will you come find us soon, Daddy?" That innocent question tied a knot in his throat. "Yes, darling, very soon. In the meantime, be good for Mr. Philip." He watched his daughter walk away toward the estate, her little hand in his assistant's, and he had the surreal impression of living a waking dream. "Alexander," Emily said softly when they were alone, "I know this is a lot for you. If you need time to think, to process all this, I can understand. Chloe and I can go back to London and come back when you're ready to." "No," he interrupted her. "No, Emily. I've already lost 7 years of my daughter's life. I don't want to lose another minute." He walked toward the estate with a determined stride, Emily by his side. It was time to face Celestine and his guests, to explain a situation that he himself didn't yet fully understand. But one thing was certain: he would not deny his daughter, whatever the consequences for his marriage and social life. The party was still in full swing when they reached the terrace. The orchestra was playing a Viennese waltz, and several couples were dancing under the string lights that had begun to glow in the twilight. Alexander scanned the crowd for Celestine and found her in an animated conversation with her mother and some friends, a glass of champagne in her hand. She looked up at him as he approached, and he immediately saw that she had been crying despite her carefully retouched makeup. "Ladies, would you mind excusing us for a moment?" he asked politely. "I'd like to speak with my wife alone." Celestine's friends exchanged knowing glances, but tactfully moved away, leaving the newlyweds face to face. Celestine drained her glass of champagne in one gulp before looking him straight in the eye. "Well," she said simply, "what did she tell you to justify hiding the existence of your daughter for 7 years?" Her voice was calm, too calm, and Alexander recognized the signs of one of her cold rages, which was far more formidable than her outbursts. "She didn't hide her out of malice, Celestine," he said, choosing his words carefully, aware that everything he said could be used against him. "Our breakup was very ugly. I said terrible things. I refused to listen to her. When she found out she was pregnant, she preferred to raise our daughter alone rather than risk me rejecting her." Celestine let out a humorless laugh. "How touching. And of course you forgive her. You forgive her for depriving you of your daughter, and for your daughter being deprived of her father. But tell me, Alexander, why did she come today? What does she want?" His wife's astuteness no longer surprised him. Celestine had always had an infallible instinct for guessing people's hidden motivations. "Chloe is sick," he confessed, and immediately saw Celestine's expression change. "She has leukemia and needs a bone marrow transplant. Emily is not a match and is hoping I am." The silence that followed this revelation was heavy. Celestine stared at him, and he saw a succession of emotions flit across her face: surprise, compassion, but also a painful resignation. "Your daughter is dying," she finally said. It wasn't a question, but a statement of fact. "And your ex-girlfriend came to ask you to save her on your wedding day to another woman." She shook her head, as if she couldn't believe the situation. "It sounds like the script of a bad melodrama. Celestine, I know this is incredibly difficult for you, for us, but this child is your daughter," she finished. "Yes, Alexander, I get it. Your daughter, whom you didn't know an hour ago, and for whom you are now willing to turn our wedding upside down." There was a bitterness in her voice that he had never heard before, and he realized he was losing his wife on the very day of their union. "That's not what I want," he protested. "I want our marriage to work, Celestine, but I can't ignore Chloe's existence now that I know she's here, and I can't let her die if I have the power to save her." Celestine stared at him, and he saw tears glisten in her blue eyes. "I know," she said softly. "And that's exactly why I'm losing you, isn't it? Because you're a good man, Alexander, a man who could never abandon his daughter, even a daughter he doesn't know. And I'm just a wife of a few hours who suddenly finds herself competing with a sick child and the woman of your life." "Emily is not the woman of my life," Alexander protested. But even to his own ears, his words sounded false. "You're the one I married, Celestine. You're the one I love." Celestine gave a sad smile that broke his heart. "You think you love me, Alexander, but look at yourself since she arrived. Your eyes are shining in a way I've never seen before. That woman and that child have awakened something in you that I've never been able to touch." He wanted to protest, but deep down, he knew she was right. Ever since he had seen Emily and Chloe, he had felt alive in a way he had forgotten, as if a part of him that had been dormant for 8 years had suddenly woken up. This didn't mean he didn't love Celestine, but he was forced to admit that his feelings had never had the same burning intensity he had known with Emily. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, feeling helpless. "Tell me what you expect of me, Celestine, and I'll do it." She looked at him with infinite sadness, and he understood that she had already made her decision. "What I want is for you to get tested for your daughter. I want you to save her if you can, and I want you to be honest with yourself about what you truly feel for her mother." "And us?" he asked hoarsely. "What's going to happen to us?" Celestine took his hands in hers, her fingers caressing the ring he had only worn for a few hours. "I don't know, Alexander. Maybe we'll manage to get through this. Maybe you'll choose your new family. Or maybe we'll discover that our marriage was a mistake from the beginning." He couldn't deny it. Maybe their marriage was indeed a mistake. Maybe he had married Celestine because she represented stability, respectability, everything a man of his standing was supposed to desire, instead of for true love. This thought terrified him, but he could no longer ignore it. "I don't want to lose you," he said sincerely. Celestine smiled through her tears. "I don't want to lose you either, but I also don't want a husband who stays with me out of obligation or habit. If we are to be together, Alexander, it has to be because we truly love each other, not because we signed some papers this morning." The orchestra started a new, softer, more melancholic tune. Around them, the guests continued to party, oblivious to the drama unfolding between the newlyweds. Alexander wanted to stop time, to go back a few hours, before Emily and Chloe had burst into his life and turned everything upside down. But he knew it was impossible. He could no longer act as if his daughter didn't exist. "Mr. Sterling?" Philip's voice made him jump. His assistant was a few feet away, accompanied by Chloe, who was holding a book in her hand, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "Miss Chloe would like to show you something she found in the library." Alexander exchanged a look with Celestine, who nodded almost imperceptibly. Whatever happened between them, he couldn't make this innocent child pay for the complications of their adult lives. "What did you find, little one?" Alexander asked, kneeling down in front of his daughter. Chloe proudly held out the book to him. "It's a very old book of French stories. Mr. Philip says it's more than 100 years old. And look, it has beautiful drawings." She opened the book to an illustrated page showing a princess in a castle, and Alexander recognized one of the works from the Vance family collection. "It's very beautiful indeed," he said, admiring the delicate illuminations. "Do you know how to read Old French?" Chloe shook her head sadly. "No, the words are too hard, but Mommy is teaching me modern French at home. She says it's important to know several languages." Alexander glanced at Celestine, who was watching the scene with an unreadable expression. "Hello, little one," Celestine said suddenly, walking over to Chloe. "How was your tour of the estate?" The little girl looked up at her with her big gray eyes, a little intimidated by the young woman's elegance. "Very good, ma'am. Your house is very beautiful. It's a real princess castle." Despite the tension of the situation, Celestine couldn't help but smile. "Thank you, darling. And tell me, are you hungry? Dinner will be served soon." Alexander was moved to see his wife making an effort to be kind to Chloe, despite the circumstances. Whatever the outcome of their marital crisis, Celestine was still a woman of class who would never make a child pay for the mistakes of adults. "Oh, yes, I'm very hungry," Chloe exclaimed. "And so is Mommy. She hasn't eaten anything since this morning. She was so nervous about coming to see you." This innocent revelation reminded Alexander that Emily was also having a very difficult time in this situation. She must have mustered enormous courage to come and see him on his wedding day, knowing she risked being poorly received, all in the hope of saving their daughter. He realized he hadn't even thought to ask her how she was doing, if she needed financial help for Chloe's care, if she was facing this ordeal alone. "Where is Mommy, by the way?" he asked Chloe. "She stayed in the library," the little girl replied. "She was looking at the books, but she looked sad. I think she was crying a little. This information squeezed Alexander's heart. Emily was crying, alone in the library, while he was arguing with his wife on the terrace. He had to go see her, to make sure she was okay. Philip, could you take Chloe to the dining room and have them serve her a snack while dinner is being prepared? He asked. I'd like to speak with her mother. His assistant nodded and held out his hand to the child. Come along, Miss Chloe. I think the chefs have prepared some delicious appetizers and maybe even some hot chocolate, if you're good. Chloe clapped with excitement and followed Philip without protest, taking her precious book with her. When she was out of earshot, Celestine Turtositin turned to Alexander. Go see her, she said simply. That poor woman must be very upset. I'll take care of our guests. Someone has to play host. There was a resignation in her voice that pained Alexander, but also a generosity that reminded him why he had wanted to marry her. Celestine, he began, but she interrupted him with a gesture. Go, Alexander. We'll have a lifetime to talk about us. That woman and that child need you now. She kissed him quickly on the cheek, a kiss as light as a feather, and then returned to her guests with her perfectly in-place facade of a smile. Alexander headed toward the library, his heart pounding. He found Emily standing in front of the large window overlooking the gardens, her arms crossed over her chest, in a defensive posture he knew well. She didn't turn when he entered, but he saw her shoulders tense slightly. Chloe told me you were sad, he said softly. Are you okay? How can I be okay, Alexander? She replied without turning around. I just crashed your new life on your wedding day to tell you we have a daughter together and that she's dying. Your wife hates me. Your guests look at me like an intruder. And you... She broke off, her voice cracking slightly. And you look completely lost. He approached her slowly, as one would approach a wounded animal. I am lost, it's true, but not for the reasons you think. She finally turned, and he saw that she had indeed been crying. Her green eyes were red-rimmed, her makeup slightly smudged despite her efforts to fix it. She was still beautiful, breathtakingly beautiful, and he felt the urge to hug her, to comfort her, as he had so many times in the past. I'm lost because everything I believed in just fell apart in a few hours, he continued. I thought I had built a perfect life, stable, predictable, and suddenly you show up with our daughter, and everything I thought was important seems futile. My businesses, my marriage, my reputation, none of that matters in the face of the fact that Chloe is sick. Emily stared at him, trying to decipher his feelings. I'm sorry, Alexander. I'm sorry for bursting into your life like this, for turning everything upside down. If I had had the choice, you did the right thing, he interrupted her. You did the right thing by coming. I have a right to know my daughter, and she has a right to have a father, even if I'm finding out 8 years too late. 8.5, Emily corrected automatically, and they both smiled, despite the seriousness of the situation. This small moment of lightness reminded him of the time they were happy together, when they could laugh about anything and everything, when the future seemed bright and full of promise. Tell me about her illness, he asked, sitting down in one of the leather armchairs in the library. I want to know everything. How long has she been sick? How did you find out? What are the treatments, the prognoses? Emily sat opposite him, and for the next half hour, she told him everything. The first symptoms she had put down to school fatigue, the tests that had revealed the horrible truth, the nights spent at the hospital while Chloe was undergoing chemotherapy, the terror of losing her that woke her up every night. Alexander listened in silence, his heart aching for everything Emily had had to endure alone. How had she found the strength to keep working, to smile for their daughter, to make her believe that everything would be okay? He admired her strength, her determination, but he was also consumed by guilt for not having been there to support them. Why didn't you contact me sooner? He asked when she had finished. From the diagnosis, you should have called me. No matter what happened between us, Emily, this is about our daughter's life. I tried, Alexander. I really did. But every time I tried to call you, I remembered that night. Your accusations. The way you looked at me, telling me you never wanted to see me again. I was angry, he said weakly. I was jealous and proud, and I said things I didn't really mean. Emily gave a bitter smile. You thought I was cheating on you with Marcus Dubois. You refused to listen to my explanations. You accused me of being a liar and a manipulator. And when I tried to tell you that that photo only showed a courtesy dance at a charity gala, you told me you didn't want to hear any more of my lies. Alexander closed his eyes, remembering that terrible night when his jealousy had destroyed their love. He had been furious when he discovered that photo of Emily in the arms of Marcus Dubois, a man he had hated since his college years, and who was now his direct competitor in business. He hadn't wanted to hear that it was a simple protocol dance, that the photographer had captured the one moment they were together all night. His wounded pride and sick jealousy had triumphed over his reason. I found out the truth a few months later, he confessed, his voice hoarse. Marcus himself told me, laughing, that the photo had been taken at the moment protocol required him to dance with all the important women of the evening. He thought it was funny that it might have caused problems between us. The memory of that belated revelation still pained him. He had destroyed their love for nothing, out of pure stupidity and male pride. But you never contacted me to apologize, Emily said, in a soft but reproachful voice. You preferred to maintain your pride rather than admit your mistakes. Alexander opened his eyes and met her gaze. I tried, he said. God knows I tried, Emily. But you had disappeared. You had moved, changed your number, left your job. No one knew where you had gone. I even hired a private detective to find you. But you seem to have erased all traces of your existence. This revelation surprised Emily. You tried to find me. For months, Alexander confirmed. I went crazy. I didn't sleep. I didn't eat. I was obsessed with the idea of finding you to beg for your forgiveness. My loved ones finally convinced me that it was better to stop, to turn the page, and rebuild my life. Just as I was giving up the search, you were discovering you were pregnant with my daughter. Emily was silent for a long moment, processing this information. I didn't know, she finally murmured. I thought you had been relieved to see me go, that you had quickly found someone else. It took me 6 years to agree to go out with another man, Alexander confessed. And even then, my relationship with Celestine is more of a marriage of convenience than a great passion. My parents and hers had wanted this union for a long time. You don't love her? Emily asked, and there was something in her voice he couldn't quite identify. Curiosity. Hope. I thought I loved her, he answered honestly. Or rather, I convinced myself that what I felt for her was love. Celestine is a wonderful woman, intelligent, elegant. She would make a perfect wife for any man. But? Emily encouraged him. Alexander looked her straight in the eyes before answering. But I don't feel the same passion for her that I felt for you. That's the truth. The silence that followed this confession was charged with electricity. Emily had blushed and looked away, visibly moved by his words. Alexander, she finally said, we can't go back. Too much has happened. Too much water has passed under the bridge. You're married now, and She hesitated. I've learned to live without you. Is there someone in your life? He asked, dreading the answer, but needing to know. Emily shook her head. No. How could there be? Between work, Chloe, and now her illness, I haven't had the time or energy for romantic relationships. Besides, how do I explain to a man that my daughter is the child of one of the most eligible bachelors in Britain? Most would have run a mile. You should have told me about Chloe from her birth, Alexander insisted. No matter our personal issues, I had a right to know my daughter, and she had a right to know her father. You're right, Emily admitted. I know that now. But at the time, I was young. I was hurt, terrified at the idea of raising a child alone. I was only 26, Alexander. She took a deep breath. I made the decision that seemed best at the time. Before Alexander could reply, the library door opened, and Chloe ran in, followed by Philip, who seemed slightly out of breath. "Mommy! Daddy! You have to come see! There are musicians playing the harp, and Mrs. Sterling said I could ask them to play my favorite song." The child's enthusiasm was contagious, and despite the seriousness of their conversation, Alexander couldn't help but smile. "What's your favorite song, little one?" he asked, getting up to approach his daughter. "La Vie en Rose?" Chloe exclaimed. "Mommy sings it to me every night before I go to sleep. It's our special song." Alexander glanced at Emily, who had blushed. That song had been theirs too, the one they listened to, holding each other close in their small flat in the city, when they were young and carefree. "It's a very beautiful song," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sure the musicians would be delighted to play it for you." He took Chloe's hand in his, still marveling at the softness of that little hand, a perfect blend of his and Emily's. "But first, how about you meet some of my friends? There are some very interesting people here tonight." The three of them returned to the terrace where the reception was in full swing. Alexander proudly introduced Chloe to some carefully selected guests, the ones he knew were discreet enough not to spread gossip all over London the next day. The little girl charmed everyone with her spontaneity and intelligence, asking pertinent questions of ambassadors about their countries, complimenting the ladies on their dresses, and listening with fascination to the stories told by captains of industry. Celestine watched the scene from afar, and Alexander saw that she was torn between admiration for this exceptional child and the pain of seeing her husband so radiant with paternal pride for the daughter of another woman. When their eyes met, she gave him a sad but sincere smile, and he understood that she was doing everything she could to accept a situation that was completely beyond her control. Dinner was served in the grand dining hall of the estate, a magnificent room with its 18th century wood paneling and crystal chandeliers. Alexander had Emily and Chloe seated at his table, despite the looks of surprise from some guests who wondered who these mysterious last-minute guests were. Celestine had insisted that Chloe sit between her and Alexander, and she spent the evening attending to the child with a kindness that deeply moved Alexander. "Mrs. Sterling," Chloe said, savoring her dessert, "your castle is really magical. It's like in a history book. You must feel like a real princess here." Celestine smiled, the first genuine smile since Emily had arrived. "Thank you, darling. And where do you live with your—" "Mommy, we have a small apartment in London," Chloe replied. "It's not as big as your castle, but Mommy says it's our cozy little nest, and we have a terrace with flowers." "That must be very nice," Celestine said politely. "And what do you like to do when you're not at school?" "I like to draw, play the piano, read stories, and I love to cook with Mommy. She teaches me how to make cakes." Chloe turned to Alexander. "Daddy, can you cook?" His daughter's innocent question made Alexander smile. "Not very well, I'm afraid. I'm better at ordering in restaurants than making meals." "I could teach you," Chloe offered enthusiastically. "Mommy says I'm good at making cookies. We could make cookies together." The idea of cooking with his daughter filled Alexander with a joy he had never felt before. "That would be wonderful, little one. I would love to learn how to make cookies with you." The evening continued in a strange atmosphere, a mix of joy and tension. The guests were having fun, dancing and laughing, celebrating what was supposed to be one of the most beautiful days of Alexander's life. But he couldn't help thinking that this day might, on the contrary, mark the end of an era. Chloe had eventually fallen asleep on a sofa in the ballroom, exhausted by all the day's emotions, and Emily watched over her tenderly. "She's adorable," Celestine said, as she approached Emily. The two women were alone for the first time that night, as Alexander had gone to greet some guests who were leaving. "You've done a wonderful job with her." Emily looked up at her rival, surprised by the sincerity of her tone. "Thank you," she said simply. "She's the light of my life." "It shows," Celestine replied. "She talks about you with so much love and admiration. You must be an extraordinary mother." An awkward silence settled between them, as neither woman knew how to address the delicate situation they were in. It was Celestine who finally broke the silence. "Can I ask you a personal question?" Emily nodded. "Are you still in love with him?" The direct question took Emily by surprise, who didn't expect such frankness. She began. "It's complicated," she finally answered. "Alexander and I shared something very strong in the past, but that's in the past. I didn't come here to win anyone back, Mrs. Sterling. I came here to save my daughter." "Our daughter," Celestine corrected softly. "She's his daughter too now." "Yes," Emily admitted. "And I know that changes everything for you. I'm sorry for bursting into your life like this on your wedding day, if I had had the choice." "You did the right thing," Celestine interrupted, echoing the words Alexander had spoken earlier. "This child needs her father, and he needs to know his daughter, even if it makes all of our lives terribly complicated." Emily studied Celestine's face, trying to understand this woman, who showed such grace in the face of adversity. "You really love him," she said, and it wasn't a question. Celestine gave a sad smile. "Yes, I do, but I'm starting to realize that maybe he doesn't love me the same way. Or at least not the way he loves you." This confession moved Emily, who hadn't imagined that Alexander's wife could be so clear-sighted about the situation. "I don't want to ruin your marriage," she said sincerely. "I just want Chloe to have a chance to survive. And if that means Alexander has to be a part of her life, then so be it. But I'm not looking to resume my relationship with him. Too much has changed." Celestine stared at her, trying to discern the sincerity of her words. "Do you really mean that?" "Yes," Emily replied firmly. "I'm no longer the naive young woman I once was. I've learned to live alone, to be strong for my daughter. I don't need to be saved anymore." Alexander chose that moment to return to them, and immediately sensed the tension between the two women. "Everything okay?" he asked, looking from his wife to his ex-fiancée. "Perfectly," Celestine replied, getting up. "Emily and I were getting to know each other. You have a remarkable daughter, Alexander. You can be proud." With those words, she walked away, leaving Alexander perplexed by what had just happened. "What did you talk about?" he asked Emily. "Chloe, the situation, what we're going to do now." Emily tenderly stroked the hair of her sleeping daughter. "Your wife is a good person, Alexander. She doesn't deserve to suffer for our past mistakes." Alexander sat beside her, contemplating Chloe's peaceful face. "What are we going to do, Emily? How are we going to manage all this?" "One step at a time," she replied practically. "First, you get the compatibility test. Then we see if you can help Chloe. And after that," she shrugged, "after that, we'll improvise. The important thing is that she gets well. The rest we'll deal with later." Alexander nodded, once again admiring Emily's strength and pragmatism. She had always had that ability to focus on the essential when the situation became critical. "I'll call my doctor tomorrow morning," he promised. "No, I'll call him tonight. I want to get this test done as soon as possible." "Alexander," Emily said softly, "you need to know one thing. Even if you're a match, there's no guarantee the transplant will work. Doctors are talking about a 70% chance of success at best. And even if everything goes well, Chloe will need months of rehabilitation, of medical follow-up." "I know," he said, "and I'll be there, for all of it. I will never let my daughter face anything alone again." The determination in his voice was absolute, and Emily felt tears well up in her eyes. Finally, after so many years, Chloe was going to have a present father in her life. Whatever happened between Alexander and her, their daughter would no longer be alone. The last guests left around 1 in the morning, leaving the estate in a relative silence. Philip had prepared a suite for Emily and Chloe, understanding that their presence would be necessary in the coming days. Chloe was still sleeping soundly, exhausted by all the day's emotions, and Alexander carried her to her room himself, moved to finally hold his daughter in his arms. "She's so light," he whispered to Emily as he gently laid her on the bed. "Is that normal? Has she lost weight because of the illness?" "A little," Emily admitted as she tucked her daughter in tenderly. "But she's doing better now. The chemotherapy had weakened her a lot, but since she's been in remission, she's regaining her strength." Alexander watched Chloe's sleeping face, noticing the paleness of her complexion and the slight dark circles under her eyes. His daughter was sick, truly sick, and he hadn't been there to support her. "I'm sorry," he said suddenly, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry for not having been there, Emily. For her birth, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school, and now for her illness. What kind of father am I?" Emily placed a comforting hand on his arm. "It's not your fault, Alexander. You didn't know she existed, and now that you do, you're here. That's what matters." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Chloe sleep, united in their love for this child they had created together, and whom life had separated them from. "She looks like you when she sleeps," Emily whispered. "She has your serious expression, as if she's thinking about important things, even while she dreams." Alexander smiled, moved by the observation. "And she has your determination. This evening, when she absolutely wanted to feed the ducks, she reminded me of you when you got an idea in your head. I hope she also has your strength to face what's ahead," Emily said with emotion. "She's going to need all of our courage." "She will have it," Alexander promised. "We'll be strong for her, both of us." The words, "we, both of us," resonated between them as both a promise and a question. Were they truly capable of being a team for their daughter after everything that had happened between them? They tiptoed out of the room, leaving the door ajar so they could hear Chloe if she woke up. In the dimly lit hallway of the estate, they stood face to face, suddenly aware that they were alone for the first time in hours. The atmosphere between them was charged with contradictory emotions: regret for the past, hope for the future, a mutual attraction they no longer dared to confess. "I should get to bed," Emily said, breaking the silence that was becoming awkward. "Tomorrow will be a long day." Alexander nodded, but made no move to leave. Emily suddenly said, "I know we can't erase the past, but I wish we could be friends for Chloe's sake, but also for us. I've missed you so much." This confession moved Alexander more than he wanted to admit. "I've missed you too," he admitted. "More than I would have liked. But Alexander, you're married now. We have to be very careful with our feelings. Chloe needs us to be balanced, not to create more complications." "I know," he said. "You're right. But knowing that you don't hate me, that maybe we could be friends again, that gives me hope." "Good night, Alexander," Emily said softly, walking toward her room. "Good night, Emily," he replied, watching her go. When she disappeared into her room, he stood still for a moment, his heart pounding. His life had just been turned completely upside down, and he still didn't know where he was headed. But one thing was for sure: he would never give up on his daughter, whatever the consequences. He finally went to his own room, where Celestine was waiting for him. She was sitting in front of her dressing table, slowly and meticulously removing her makeup. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Alexander saw all the tiredness and sadness his wife had hidden behind her facade of a smile all night. "How is she?" Celestine asked without turning around. "She's asleep. She's exhausted by all her emotions." Alexander walked over to her, hesitating. "Celestine, I know this day has been terrible for you. I know none of this was planned, and I—" "Don't apologize," she interrupted him. "It's not your fault. This situation is too much for all of us." She finally turned to him, and he saw that she had been crying. "Just tell me one thing, Alexander. Are you happy to have discovered the existence of your daughter?" The question was loaded, but Alexander decided to be honest. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "Despite the circumstances, despite the complexity of the situation, yes, I'm happy to know Chloe exists. She's extraordinary, Celestine. Smart, funny, lovable. I can't regret meeting her." Celestine nodded, as if this answer confirmed what she already knew. "And what do you feel about seeing her again?" The question was even more difficult, and Alexander took time to reflect before answering. "I feel a lot of things," he finally said. "Guilt for the way we broke up, admiration for the strength she has shown in raising Chloe alone, gratitude for having come to find me despite everything that happened between us." "And love?" Celestine insisted. "Do you still feel love for her?" Alexander closed his eyes, unable to meet his wife's gaze. "I don't know," he confessed. "I thought I had moved on, but seeing her again today has awakened things I thought were buried. But Celestine, that doesn't change my feelings for you. You're my wife, and I want our marriage to work, even if she were free, even if she wanted you." Celestine's voice was now heavy with pain, and Alexander realized his wife was suffering more than she wanted to show. "Celestine, please don't ask me to answer hypothetical questions. The reality is that you are my wife. Emily has her own life, and we all have to learn to coexist for Chloe's sake." "You're not answering my question," Celestine insisted, "because you already know the answer, don't you? If that woman held out her hand to you, you would take it without hesitation. You would give up on me, on our marriage, on everything we have built together." Her voice broke on the last words, and Alexander's heart sank. He didn't want to hurt Celestine, but he couldn't lie to her either. "I don't know what I would do," he said sincerely. "This is all too new, too overwhelming. I need time to understand what I feel, to see my way through my feelings. But Celestine, I promise you one thing. I will be honest with you. If my feelings change, if I realize I can't be the husband you deserve, I'll tell you. You don't deserve to be lied to or to have someone stay with you out of pity." She stared at him, and he saw a succession of emotions pass through her eyes. Pain, anger, resignation, but also a form of respect for his honesty. "That's all I can ask for," she finally said. "Honesty, even if the truth hurts." She got up and went to bed, her slow, tired movements betraying the emotional exhaustion of the day. "Where are you going to sleep?" she asked, seeing that Alexander wasn't moving. "In my study," he replied. "I think we both need space to think." Celestine nodded, grateful that he wasn't pretending everything was okay between them. "Good night, Alexander," she said, as she slid under the covers. "Good night, Celestine, and thank you." "Thank you for what?" "For being so kind to Chloe tonight. You could have been cold or hostile, but you were wonderful to her. That means a lot to me." Celestine gave a sad smile. "She's not to blame for all this mess. And besides, how could anyone not love her?" With those words, she turned off the light, plunging the room into darkness. Alexander stood still for a moment, then quietly left the room. He went to his study, a room he had set up in a tower of the estate that served as his refuge when he needed to think. The walls were lined with books, and a large window overlooked the moonlit gardens. Alexander sat in his leather armchair and stared out at the night, trying to take stock of this day that had changed everything. He was a father. This thought filled him with a joy he had never felt before, mixed with a panicked terror at the idea that his daughter was sick. Chloe was everything he had ever dreamed of in a child. Smart, funny, endearing, curious about everything. In just a few hours, she had completely captured his heart. He was willing to do anything to save her, even give his own life if necessary. And Emily. Seeing Emily again was like a punch to the stomach. All the emotions he thought he had gotten over had come rushing back. Love, desire, regret, guilt. She was even more beautiful than before, but above all, she had acquired a strength and maturity that made her even more captivating. The way she had raised their daughter alone, the way she faced the illness with courage, the way she had come to see him despite their painful past, all of it commanded his admiration. And Celestine, his poor wife, who found herself caught in a storm she hadn't seen coming. Alexander sincerely loved her, but he was beginning to realize that his love was perhaps more affection and mutual respect than a true passion. Celestine deserved better than a husband who dreamed of another woman. But how could he tell her that the day after their wedding? This captivating story is far from over. If you want to know what happens next, please like this story and subscribe to our channel for more. What do you think about the dilemmas Alexander is facing? How do you see the continuation of this complex story between the love of the past, the obligations of the present, and the hope for Chloe's future? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions are of the utmost importance for the continuation of this emotional saga.